Welcome to The Big Picture, a show that takes a deep dive into the political landscape of not only the world, but right here in our own backyard of Illinois.
It's showtime, folks.
The Big Picture is on WCPT 820. And now, here's your host, Edwin Eisendrath.
Saturday is Yom Kippur, the Jewish Day of Atonement. I won't be joining you in person that day, so I'm taping our show early. Well, most of it. As we get closer to the end of our election season, it's even more important that your voices be heard. So Paul, who is in the studio and managing the board, will open the lines and take your calls in our last half hour. Please do call. There's so much to talk about, and your voice needs to be heard. Now, as I am recording this, Florida is recovering from its second hurricane in just a couple of weeks. Before anything else, I want the people down there to know that those of us here in the upper Midwest have you in our hearts and are prepared to offer whatever help you need, as we have for the folks in North Carolina. But for now, please stay safe. Okay, elsewhere, Americans have been voting for about a week. I voted. I hope many of you have. But this is precisely where we were 4 years ago, when Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump decided to break with tradition and their own avowed rules to push through the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court seat previously occupied by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. What they did was to change the rules in the middle of an election to solidify their own power. And now that voting is underway, 4 years later, we have to expect them to do the same thing again. In fact, they are. So forget, if you can, the lies they tell. Forget that their lies are making it harder to help the hurricane victims. Forget the lies that forced school closings in Springfield, Ohio. Forget the lies that Donald Trump tried to save Obamacare. Whopper that one was. Forget the lies that Democrats have the power to control the weather. Crazy though that is. Social media has made it possible for that old adage now literally to be true. Lies circle the globe before the truth can put on its shoes. But look, speed and volume don't make a thing true when it isn't. Let's hold to the truth. So forget each and every lie. But remember the purpose of all their lies, because it's the same purpose for all of them, to cement their power over the rest of us. That's why they lie. So instead of focusing on the details of their dishonesty, let's look at what they're doing. When they have power, Republicans don't use it to make America great again or great or anything except to lock in their own power. That's what they use their power for. In 2010, back then, they passed the most partisan gerrymanders in our history. And then they fought every effort to undo them. In Wisconsin, remember, they tried to impeach an honest judge before she even heard a case, just to stop her from hearing a case on their partisan gerrymandering. In Ohio, Republican Secretary of State Frank LaRose, he fought to stop a ballot initiative to end gerrymandering. He lost. So now he has authored language that folks will see when they vote. The language lies and says the initiative will force the state's district to be gerrymandered. It's patently false. And it's not a campaign lie. It is the official language of the state of Ohio that will accompany ballots. This is what they use their power for. Across the country, 27 Republican-controlled states have made it harder for college students to vote. Some have limited the location of polling places. Imagine that. Some have moved drop boxes. Some have changed the ID requirements for registering to vote. And in Georgia, oh my gosh, in Georgia, the Republicans forced changes to their election laws and procedures that not only throw people off the voter rolls, they require lengthy and hand counting of ballots, which is inaccurate and pushes it past the time we need it to be done. And they permit local officials to refuse to certify any election where they suspect the results. not an investigation, not fact-finding, just election deniers and their suspicions. Oh, we don't have to count those votes. This is what we're up against. In West Virginia, the Republican House there passed a resolution saying that the state would not recognize election results they found questionable. What does that even mean? They're not talking about their own votes here. West Virginia is saying, in effect, that if the rest of the country elects a president they don't like, and someone claims that the election was wrong because, I don't know, too many non-citizens voted, then the state won't accept the results. What does that even mean? They won't accept the results of an election. Is this secession all over again? Boy, it didn't end well for them the last time. Well, actually, West Virginia was on the right side the last time. That's why they split from Virginia. But this time, they won't recognize an American president who's duly elected. What does that mean? Do we kick their senators out? Do we kick their legislators out? Do we say you can come back after you've decided you're part of this country? Do we make them a territory again and put in a territorial government? This is a terrible place we are, where states are saying they won't. They won't pay attention to the elections. But this is what they are doing. So forget their lies and pay attention to what they've done and continue to do. They're making it harder for Democrats to vote. They're making it possible for votes not to be counted. They're making it legal to refuse to certify votes they don't like. And they're sowing doubt across America with their lies so that they can try to take power even after they lose. That's what they're really doing. Controlling the weather, eating dogs, whatever the other lies are they're telling, unimportant. What's important is they're trying to steal their way back into power. And when they're there, you know what they'll do. They will use power to hold power. Not to fix your problems, not to fix your neighbor's problems, not to make America the nation it can be, but to hold power. It's the same thing all around the world. It's what the Chinese Communist Party exists for. It's what Putin exists for. But we, to the extent that we are still an exceptional nation, we are exceptional because the people are sovereign and because, you know what, there's something more important than holding power. And my gosh, do we have an example of that in President Joe Biden. My friends, things are different on our side. Look, Democrats are using the power they have to help Americans. We didn't change the rules to advantage our party. Frankly, we should have done a little of that, or at least to even the playing field. But instead, we changed them to help working Americans. We passed laws to protect folks whose livelihoods were destroyed by the pandemic. We passed laws to onshore manufacturing jobs. We passed laws to fight climate change. We passed laws to help create private sector investment in America. And we did it without Republican help. And then, you know what? We still work with Republicans to pass bipartisan laws to rebuild our infrastructure. The other guys, they won't even vote for a bipartisan bill that permanently addresses the weaknesses on our border. They won't do it because the purpose of governing for them is to strengthen their party. Today, our nation is actually strong, no matter what they say, because of the work we did these past 4 years. And we're positioned to be even stronger in the years ahead. But all that comes crashing down if Donald Trump is back in the White House. And look, and this is the main point I want to leave you with. Help isn't coming. Help isn't coming. The Supreme Court, they won't protect the vote. John Roberts dedicated his entire career to undoing voting rights. His court made presidents above the law, shut the judiciary doors to gerrymandering cases, and legalized political bribery. You know where they're coming from. They just want a power they can buy. They ignored the 14th Amendment when it applied to Donald Trump in Colorado, and they enforced it when it applied to everyone else. We cannot look to the judiciary for assistance when the democracy is threatened. The judiciary is already compromised. My friends, the mob is at the gate, angrily waving their pitchforks, and help is not coming. But here's the thing. We don't actually need help. We aren't children. We are adults, and together we are the sovereign power of the greatest nation on earth. You know what? We will vote, and we will vote in such overwhelming numbers that they cannot cheat their way around the results. And until the polls close, every one of us, everyone listening to this call, and millions of others, what are we going to do? We're going to make calls, knock on doors, and ensure that we all show up. And you know what? After the polls close, every one of us is going to demand that every vote be counted and that the election is certified. This time, we will not allow that criminal Donald Trump and 147 Republicans in Congress, all violators of their oaths, to slow it down. This time, anyone who tries to stop us is going to pay a steep penalty. And you better think about that if you're planning to cheat. Look, as Joe Biden likes to say, this is the United States of America, and there is nothing we cannot do if we do it together. And that includes saying no to the MAGA minority's attempt to take over our country. All right, I have a great show today, and you are going to love it. My first guest is the incredible Max Boot, who's got this new book. I'm going to tell you about it when we come back. Stay tuned.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Historian, scholar of armed conflict, best-selling author, Washington Post columnist, and the Jeane Kirkpatrick Senior Fellow for National Security Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. Max Boot is going to spend about the next 45 minutes with us, and it won't be long enough. His recently published biography, Reagan, His Life and Legend, is a bestseller. I read it, and I learned a ton, including to admire a guy who could write about Reagan without falling for him or railing against him. Max, welcome.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate being on.
Hey, there is so much going on in the world, in the United States and around the world, and in conflicts that I want to talk to you about. But before we get to that, I do want to spend time on your book. And even before we get to your book, I just want to ask you about history generally, the practice of studying history. You've described yourself as a former Republican. Do you think your study of history is what inoculated you against the lies that have enthralled so many former conservatives who are now Trumpists?
Well, that's a great question. I think that was certainly, part of it, because, I've certainly seen where extremist rhetoric can take nations. I think part of it is also probably my background, having, been born in the Soviet Union, come here with my family when I was 6 years old. I mean, I'm, very sensitized to the loss of freedom, and I'm very concerned about leaders who threaten to undermine democracy. And so that's something that, has alarmed me from day one with Trump.
Yeah, I ask that because Americans are sort of famously careless about history. And it's really important, and that's why I loved your book. But even before we get into the details of the book, I want to talk to you about the title, because the phrase I'm used to hearing when we talk about a historical figure is their life and legacy. But you chose Life and Legend as the title, and I found that curious when I started the book, and then by the time I was about halfway through it, I found it perfect. Talk about that.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I chose that because there have been so many legends, so many myths about Ronald Reagan, many of which he created about himself. And so, there tends to be this mythology around the 40th president, which I'm hoping to clear away with this book and to really tell the true life story, which is often very different from the mythology, and in some ways less flattering, in other ways even more flattering. So I think, as is often the case, fact is more interesting than fiction, and I'm trying to tell the factual story of Ronald Reagan, which is often very much at odds with kind of the legends that have grown up around him.
Yeah, I learned a ton. I mean, but I also came away with the book, and I don't know that I don't know how to say this. Either I feel like I understood Reagan, but I didn't know him after I read it, or maybe I knew him but didn't understand him. I don't know what it was, but there's just something like the facts of his life. You lay them out, and it's pretty clear, the story. The man is still a bit of a mystery to me.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair enough, because he kept kind of the entire world at a safe remove, even though he had a reputation for being so genial and open and friendly. And that was kind of the image that he cultivated for himself. In fact, he was kind of a loner and kind of distant from others. And even Nancy Reagan, who was the person probably closest to him, said that a part of him was walled off even from her. So, and it was certainly the case that even his closest aides often found him to be somewhat remote and inscrutable. That was kind of the nature of the man, that, he was hard to know because he didn't want to be known. And I think I've done the best job you could possibly do to break through those barriers. But at the end of the day, you're just left with a bunch of paradoxes, including the fact that he could be so supremely ideological, but also so resolutely pragmatic, or the fact that he could be so confrontational in public and so non-confrontational in private, or again, as we were just discussing, the fact that he could be so genial and friendly and open, seemingly open on television and in public appearances, and yet so distant and remote and even cold in private. So these are, at the end of the day, I mean, these are just the paradoxes you have to grapple with to understand who Ronald Reagan really was.
Yeah. I mean, and you talk about that paradox specifically in the book about, his actions as an elected official as opposed to his actions as a candidate. I mean, and you talked about this both when he was governor and as president. And I'm thinking about things like taxes and abortion and the Cold War. Do you want to tell people about that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's one of the most central paradoxes you have to understand to figure out Reagan, because he had a reputation as an ideologue, as a right-wing hardliner, and there's a good reason for that, because as I show in the book, by the early 1960s, this one-time New Dealer who had voted for FDR 4 times had moved very far to the right and was often repeating spurious quotations concocted by the John Birch Society to claim that social welfare legislation like Medicare and Medicaid was leading America down the road to communism. So he often sounded like kind of a right-wing kook. And yet, once he was elected as governor of California in 1966, and then again elected as president of the United States in 1980, in both jobs, he showed this unexpected pragmatic streak where, as governor of California, for example, he signed one of the most liberal abortion laws in the country and a very tough gun control bill. He often railed against, hippies and beatniks at California universities, and yet he hiked spending on higher education by 136%. He cut deals with Jesse Unruh, the Speaker of the California Assembly, and then later in Washington, he cut deals with Tip O'Neill, the Speaker of the House. And sure, he sometimes cut taxes, but he also raised taxes. In 1986, he signed a bill that legalized millions of undocumented immigrants. And his crowning achievement in his second term as president, he worked with Mikhail Gorbachev to peacefully end the Cold War. And remember, this is Mikhail Gorbachev, the world's #1 communist, the leader of the Soviet Union. And this is Ronald Reagan, who had been railing against communism since the 1940s, who had denounced détente in the 1970s, was seen by many as a warmonger and a hardliner. And yet here he was, striking up a friendship that changed the world and helped to end the Cold War between Gorbachev and Reagan. So, his record just does not align with the mythology about him as this hardline ideologue, and yet he could be very ideological. He just was also turned out to be supremely pragmatic in office.
For a guy who was a bit of a loner and standoffish, I guess, he seems to have been a good read of persons. I mean, he saw something in Gorbachev that made him think, this is a man I can deal with.
Yes, they established a real rapport in Geneva in 1985, and that was the point where there was still a lot of uncertainty in the Reagan administration about Gorbachev's intentions. And in fact, that uncertainty persisted because many conservatives like Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger were convinced that Gorbachev was just another, run-of-the-mill communist who was, bent on world domination and was trying to get America to disarm. But Reagan, spent a couple of days with Gorbachev in Geneva, and those were the 2 days that kind of changed the world because he saw something else in Gorbachev. He saw that his ally, Margaret Thatcher, had been right when she said, this is a man we can do business with. And so they set out to do business together to reduce levels of nuclear weapons and to reduce the tensions that could have led to World War III. So that was, a monumental achievement.
Yeah, I mean, every president has their pluses and minuses. Some a lot more minuses than pluses. But for me, and I'm old enough to remember his presidency, his record on civil rights in America, apartheid in South Africa, his absolute failure in the face of AIDS, his busting of the Air Traffic Controllers Union, the military buildup that brought us to the brink of war with Soviets made me furious at the time. And they'll forever color how I think about the presidency. But I'm in awe of the way he built an enormous majority across all of America and passed bipartisan legislation, including, as you said, on immigration, and for gosh sakes, ended the Cold War. It leaves a guy like me, I don't know, flummoxed a little bit. And reading your book just reminded me of these contradictions.
Yeah, no, it's all completely fair. And I as you know from the book, I make many of the same criticisms that you do, which I think are totally fair because, while he had a great record on immigration, he had a terrible record on civil rights. And, he had a double standard on human rights where he called out human rights abuses in the Soviet Union, but made apologies for South Africa and refused to support a tough South Africa sanctions bill. And of course, his shameful failure to address the AIDS pandemic as tens of thousands of Americans were dying that's a huge blot on his record. And so I think that's all completely fair. And we haven't even mentioned the Iran-Contra scandal and other scandals. Right. And there were many scandals on his watch because he was such a poor manager and allowed people to run amok and do what they wanted without much supervision or oversight. So that's all completely fair, and that should color any judgment of the Reagan presidency. But at the end of the day, he was still in a poll of historians just a few years ago rated as the number 9 president in U.S. history out of 46. So certainly not Mount Rushmore level, not FDR, not Washington, not the truly great ones, but he's kind of like one rung down at the near great level. And I think, there's a reason why historians reach that judgment. I think it basically comes down to two things in my mind. First, his great achievement was to help the nation turn the corner from the dark and despairing days of the 1970s, the decade of Watergate and Vietnam and the Iran hostage crisis, stagflation, gasoline lines. It was, I'm just barely old enough to remember how messed up the nation seemed in 1981 when Reagan took over, how people were losing faith in America and didn't think that a president could be successful. And he restored that faith with this kind of sunny optimism. So, and by 1984, he was running on a campaign slogan of Morning in America, and people believed it. And he won 49 out of 50 states, which, seems like a mythological achievement today. I mean, imagine any politician winning 49 states, but he did because he was able to reach across partisan lines and to become broadly popular. So that was a huge achievement. And the other one, which we were just discussing, was his success in working with Gorbachev to end the Cold War. And there's kind of a mythology about that because a lot of conservatives today want to say that, Reagan bankrupted the Soviet Union with his defense buildup and led to the collapse of the Berlin Wall. And as I show in the book, that's not really accurate. It wasn't his his confrontational approach towards the Soviet Union his first term that was transformational. It was his conciliatory approach to Gorbachev in his second term, his willingness to work with Gorbachev, that actually produced these historic results. But he still, even though he's often credited with the wrong thing, he still deserves a lot of credit. And so that's why I think, despite all his failures and setbacks and many mistakes, he's still rated pretty highly by historians.
And I think all those reasons are fair. There's one more I would add. His voice. I mean, I know when I think about going out and giving a talk, sometimes you just hear you hear old voices in your head. And, for a while, I thought Bill Clinton was one of the best political speakers I'd ever heard. But, as I get older, I hear Ronald Reagan's voice about America when he talked about us, his very sunny and optimistic, and even when I knew he was lying through his teeth, unifying vision of America is just enormously powerful.
Yeah, no, there's a reason why he was called the great communicator, and yep. He really was. I mean, I remember an anecdote in the book about what happened on the day that the Space Shuttle Challenger blew up in 1986, and earlier that day, Tip O'Neill was in the Oval Office, and he was furious with Reagan. He was chewing out Reagan, saying that he had forgotten where he came from, that his policies are helping the rich, that he was screwing the poor people of America. And so Tip O'Neill walked out of the Oval Office just furious with Reagan, thought he was clueless and didn't know what was going on, and was pursuing, policies that were very harmful to the disadvantaged. And then, the space shuttle blew up, and then later that evening, that afternoon, Reagan gave this magnificent short address that channeled the grief of the nation and paid tribute to the astronauts and kind of brought healing and hope to the nation at a very dark moment. And Tip O'Neill had to reflect, wow, this guy is one of the greatest speech makers I've ever seen in the presidency. Tip O'Neill thought that his communications abilities were only rivaled by those of FDR himself. So that's kind of the paradox of Ronald Reagan, that even people who disagreed with him or got mad at him were still incredibly impressed by the way he was able to communicate and to use the bully pulpit of the presidency.
I'm going to talk about the present moment for a second to help ask a question about the book. My view is that we don't have a right of center party in America anymore. We have a cult, a strange one. And I worry that Democrats, and I am one, if we are the only party, we will get things wrong like every monopoly always does. So I want to, with that sort of framing, do you think that Tip O'Neill and Mikhail Gorbachev deserve credit for what we think of as the greatness of Ronald Reagan?
I mean, I wouldn't put it quite that way. I think Ronald Reagan deserves credit for working with Gorbachev and Tip O'Neill, despite their obvious differences, to get things done. But I will say, I certainly think that both Gorbachev and Tip O'Neill also deserve credit for the same word that I apply to Reagan, which is pragmatic. They were all three of them pragmatic and willing to move away from ideological straitjackets to get things done. And, Tip O'Neill was a supremely practical politician who could count votes, and he could disagree with Reagan on some things but still reach agreement with him on other things. And he didn't let his personal feelings get in the way of what he saw as his job, which was to pass legislation, to do deals, to address issues like the Social Security crisis, for example, which they did in the early 1980s. I think there was, and Gorbachev was kind of the same way, that he was certainly not bound by the straitjacket of communist ideology. He was willing to rethink the belief system that he had grown up with. Even though he was now the number one communist in the world, he lost faith in the communist ideology and was willing to work with Reagan to forge a new world. So I think in a lot of ways, the entire world is very lucky that we have these three people in positions of power, and in the 1980s, Gorbachev and Reagan and Tip O'Neill, because they were able to address major problems and get things done in a kind of a pragmatic fashion.
Yeah, and I mean, pragmatic means you got to deal with people who aren't this. I mean, I just don't know if any of them would have been as good if they didn't have the other across the table. You know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that's right. I mean, I think the key, and I'm often struck by kind of the unyielding attitude of today's Republicans who view compromise as a synonym for sellout. And Reagan just had a very different attitude, where he often expressed his contempt for conservatives who want to go over the cliff with their flags flying. He often said, if I can get 80% of what I want today and come back for more tomorrow, that's a victory, and I'm not going to hold out for 100% and get nothing. And that was just a very practical political philosophy, which sadly has been lost by a lot of Reagan's heirs in the Republican Party.
Your book is clearly detailed about Ronald Reagan, but it's about something else too. It's about America's transition from a rural society to the contemporary industrial power it became, because that shift happened during Reagan's lifetime. And in some ways, he exemplified that from his small town roots here in my state, in Illinois, to his life in California and in the White House. And I wonder if this notion of being practical, of like just, deal with what's in front of you and get stuff done, was part of that transition. The whole country was part of our ethos during the time of that transition.
I think it was. I mean, this is something that Stu Spencer said to me, and Stu was, as close to Reagan as anybody. He was his chief political consultant from 1966 on, and Stu is still very much with us and living near Palm Springs, California. And Stu said, the way you got to understand Reagan is he was, a product of the Midwest, and he, came out of this rural part of the country with this very pragmatic ethos, which is that his ethos, Stu explained, was like that of the farmer who goes to market and wants to get $20 a bushel for his corn, but he can't get $20, so he has to sell it for $15. And he says, okay, well, that's good enough. I wish I got 20, but I'll take the 15 and call it a day. And that very, pragmatic ethos, I think, is something that Stu thinks and others think was inculcated in Reagan in the Midwest. And of course, he had no choice but to be extremely practical, because he grew up extremely poor. He really his family had very little money. His father was this alcoholic shoe salesman who kept losing one job after another. And so he really had to, pull himself up by his bootstraps like a Horatio Alger hero and kind of make his own way in the world. And, he didn't have the luxury of making grand and futile gestures. He had to survive, and he had to get ahead, and he knew what that took.
Yeah, I've often thought, when I think about Democrats in my lifetime, the more ideological ones came from the coast, and the more practical ones, I mean, they were all, certainly in my state, even the crooks were practical. They were much more pragmatic. Hey, Max, I loved your discussion of labor and Ronald Reagan's time as a labor leader. I think he was a bit of again, very complicated. He was an effective labor leader, and he sold everybody out to make deals with the management. Maybe he was, participated in the blacklist. But I mean, he did what he had to do, I guess, for himself in a way. This was the period when he was inventing his brand.
Yeah, I mean, he's still the only labor leader ever to become president of the United States, but he was certainly not a typical union leader. You would never, mistake him for Sean Fain, the head of the United Auto Workers.
Nope.
Because even when he was the head of, again, the Screen Actors Guild is a union, but it's a very strange union. It's undoubtedly the richest union in America in terms of, the income of its members. And, Reagan was popular with his fellow actors, but he was also popular with the studios because he was seen as somebody who was a friendly labor leader who was willing to cut deals with the studios and did not make, extreme demands. And in fact, as I show in the book, he was accused of, in some ways, compromising the actor's interest at the behest of his management company, MCA, which was also, at that time, the largest production studio in, at least of TV and then later of films in Hollywood. He talked about in later life how dealing with the studio chieftains was pretty good preparation for dealing with Soviet leaders, and there's probably an element of truth to that. But he was, in both cases, really with both, the studio chiefs and with Gorbachev, it was not a confrontational attitude that he took. It was actually fairly cooperative.
Yeah. All right, everybody. I'm talking with Max Boot, who, among other things, is the author of this fabulous, deeply researched, and very clearly written biography of Reagan called Reagan, His Life and Legend. And I hope you'll read it. It's important if you want to understand not just this important president, but us. It's really, in some ways, about America in really important ways. Hey, Max, I could talk about the book for another hour, but I would like, if you don't mind, just to get your views on some of the things that are happening in the world for some of the time we have left. It's a complicated time. Can we do that?
Of course, yeah.
There are I don't know, a lot of places in the world that call our attention, but I'm particularly worried about three. Russia's attack in Ukraine, China's militarization of the South China Sea, and I don't know, the exploding violence in the Middle East, which is almost impossible for me to characterize. And I'd love to get your take on each of these, one at a time. Like, Russia's trying to move the boundaries in Europe by force, something that has never had a happy history. What do you think of policies that the Biden administration has tried to put in place as response to that? And what do you think of what does our current election mean for that?
Well, I do think that Putin's invasion of Ukraine is a generational challenge, which will define the 21st century, whether it's going to be an era when dictators can prey on the weak and violate international law and engage in aggression, or whether it will be a more rules-based international order that will uphold the basic principles of the post-1945 world order. I think a lot of that will be decided in Ukraine. And if Putin wins in Ukraine, I think that'll be a green light for China to attack Taiwan. And it'll also be a green light for Putin to expand his aggression against the Baltic republics and other NATO members, and will make the world a much more dangerous place. So I think it's critically important to stop Putin in Ukraine. I think that, the Biden administration policies have been pretty good, not quite as aggressive as what I would like to see. I mean, he's kind of hesitated at every turn whether to supply Ukraine with tanks or with missiles or with F-16s. And I think that Ukraine needs all those things and as much weaponry as possible. But I think, the Biden administration in cooperation with our European allies have done a lot. And I think Biden gets a lot of credit for marshaling this 50-nation coalition to support Ukraine and keep them in the fight. And I think it's incredibly important that we continue to do that. But my concern is that Ukraine will lose the war if Donald Trump wins the election, because, he clearly admires Putin, communicates with Putin. He seems to have no understanding of Ukraine or the need to defend Ukraine. And, he claims he's going to end the war in a day. And I'm afraid the only way he's going to end the war in a day is by cutting Ukraine off and leaving it at Putin's mercy. So I think that to some extent, the fate of Ukraine will be determined at the ballot box in America.
Yeah, I agree with that. Max, what do you think about, it's a sort of what do you think about the idea that of using American weapons to attack targets in Russia itself? That's certainly been a question, and an important one that I know the administration has grappled with.
Yeah, I mean, the administration has already given limited approval to Ukraine for Ukraine to use its weapons against some Russian targets close to the border, and now Ukraine would like permission to attack targets farther away from the border, like airfields, supply depots, army bases, and so forth. And I think they should have that permission because Russia should not have a zone of immunity to wage war against Ukraine and just grind Ukraine down. I think it'll save lives if Ukraine can intercept Russian military equipment before it arrives in Ukraine. And, Putin has made, a lot of menacing noises about and even saber-rattling about nuclear weapons. But, the West has crossed one red line after another with impunity. And there's really not much he can do. He's not going to start World War III. He's not going to start a nuclear war. He's not suicidal. I think it's kind of amazing to me that so many Republicans are opposed to aid to Ukraine because it's hard to know what Ronald Reagan would think about a lot of debates that are going on today. But if he were still alive today, I'm 100% sure that he would be completely in Ukraine's corner because he believed in aiding the victims of Russian aggression. And I'm sure Reagan would be supporting Ukraine and channeling as much aid as possible to Ukraine. So I think, it's a tragedy that so many Republicans have turned against this embattled democracy.
Yeah. I mean, it's just one last bit about this. So you're confident that this notion of mutual assured destruction is going to hold and Putin will not test it with some tactical use of nuclear weapons?
I think the odds are pretty low. I mean, you can never say something with 100% certainty, but I think the odds are low. And I think the risk of letting Putin get away with his aggression in Ukraine and prevail in Ukraine, I think that's a greater risk than the risk of his escalation.
Boy, I agree with that. Okay, so related to this in a way, the New York Times, I think yesterday, had this big story about America's reinvestment in our nuclear arsenal. Like trillions of dollars we're going to spend upgrading nuclear weapons and then maybe even producing more. When one of Reagan's signature achievements was reducing the number of nuclear weapons in the world, is rearmament, I guess, proliferation, a new arms race, something that we need to think about again and think about more seriously?
I mean, it is something that we need to think about. Unfortunately, because of Russia's aggression, arms control with Russia has broken down, and we've never really had arms control with China, and they're in the midst of a massive nuclear and military buildup. And I think it would be a very good thing if we could, achieve arms control, especially with China. I think that would help be stabilizing to both sides. But at the moment, there's not much chance of that. So, I think we do need to maintain our nuclear arsenal. Whether we need to spend all this, as much money as we're currently spending on it is an open question. And I do think, we need a lot of defense spending to deal with a lot of the challenges we face in the world, whether it's China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, so many others. But I do think a lot of our defense spending is misdirected, including to things like surface warships, which are now becoming sitting ducks for missiles and drones. And I think we need to adapt to this new age of unmanned warfare, which is dawning in Ukraine in particular. And my concern is that the Pentagon is preparing for the last war and isn't ready for the kind of conflict that we may face in the future.
I mean, like every big bureaucracy, they get captured by their own vendors, by the people they spend make so wealthy. So I wonder if the defense industry in America isn't, addicted to the flows of money for the big systems and big ships that they're providing, and that is keeping us from being nimble and making the progress we need to make. What do you think?
I think that's absolutely true. I mean, there's a huge constituency among defense contractors and members of Congress who get campaign contributions from those contractors and have the contractors employ people in their districts. So it's very hard to cut off funding for things like new aircraft carriers, which cost something like $13 billion. and really are not optimized for this new age of warfare. And I think that's a huge problem. I think we're spending a lot of our defense dollars on systems that have a political constituency, not necessarily the systems that are going to be most vital in a future conflict.
Yeah, that is a big warning we need to pay attention to. Hey, sort of one more topic on I want to turn to China, but one more topic related to what you just said. One of the, to me at least, information is now a national security topic. We're clearly seeing other actors, foreign actors, try to influence our own election here. Our own news ecosystem is in some ways broken. Are we doing anything in the defense world to protect ourselves and also, I guess, to be offensive with information in the same way that we're seeing other countries?
I mean, I think there are efforts to try to guard against, election interference from Russia or China or those other countries. I'm not sure if we're doing enough on information operations on our end to get more information into places like China and Russia, where they operate under a very strict censorship. And in the case of Russia, it's getting stricter all the time. So I think it is important for us that, as we did during the Cold War days, and something that Ronald Reagan emphasized was, trying to get information behind the Iron Curtain. And I think that's something that we need to focus and do more of today.
Yeah. All right, let me turn to China. When we talked about Putin, you sort of said this is a question of whether we will be a lawless world or there will be some global order that countries follow. My understanding is China is less interested in the kind of raw, we're going to move all the borders that Russia's interested in, but that they don't like the world order that we created and want to create a different rules-based system that favors them. And what do you think? And what should we be doing? I mean, the South China Sea is terrifying in its capacity to cause trouble for the whole world.
I mean, I think China presents a massive challenge to the United States and its allies, and in many ways different from the challenge of the Soviet Union, because, in the 1980s when Reagan was in office and dealing with the Soviet Union was not a major American trade partner. So the economic dimension was largely missing from our competition, whereas today China, of course, is the world's second largest economy, one of our largest trade partners, one of Europe's largest trade partners. So, it requires a different approach than the one of the Soviet Union. And so I get concerned when some people on the right try to draw analogies from Ronald Reagan's policy towards the Soviet Union, and often it's kind of a mythologized and caricatured version of Reagan's actual policies, and say we need to apply that policy to China today, and that we need to quote unquote defeat China as Reagan supposedly defeated the Soviet Union. That just is not based on an accurate analogy. As we were discussing, Reagan cooperated with Gorbachev. He didn't, his confrontational policy did not bring down the Soviet Union. But today the problem, of course, is that there is no Gorbachev to work with in Beijing. Xi Jinping is more like Leonid Brezhnev. He's a hardliner. So I think we need to be careful in how we deal with them. I don't think we should just ratchet up tensions willy-nilly and say, oh, this will bring down China as it supposedly brought down the Soviet Union. It's not going to happen, in part because also China didn't happen in the Soviet Union. It's certainly not going to happen with China, which is much more of an economic superpower than the Soviet Union ever was. So I think we need to pursue a more nuanced policy of containing and deterring China, of building up U.S. alliances, which is something that I think Biden has done very well with, countries like Japan, South Korea, Australia, India, and others, to kind of contain the menace of Chinese power. But I think we also need to maintain dialogue with Beijing to reduce tensions and to reduce the risk of accidental conflict. And I think we need to continue trading with Beijing, because I think that's in our mutual self-interest. So I'm, quite concerned about Trump threatening to massively boost tariffs basically on all imported goods, but certainly those from China as well, because I think that will be a policy that will hurt the United States, that will be economically very painful to us, but really, will set up the whole world in a more dangerous spot where, we're going to move away from the policies of free trade that have characterized our policies since 1945. I think that's dumb economically, but I think it's also dangerous from a security standpoint, because I do think that, our economic interdependence, it's certainly not a panacea. It's not going to necessarily prevent conflict, but I think it is important to have those links, because I do think it is a positive stabilizing force in our relationship with China.
Yeah, I don't know what I think about that, Max, because pre-World War I, Europe was completely integrated economically, and it didn't stop them from going after each other. But
that's true.
I think complexity, and you're describing something that's very complex, doesn't lend itself easily to American politics these days.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think, one of the things that worries me about China is that there is kind of a race to the right with both Democrats and Republicans kind of posturing to who can sound tougher on China. And I think that can potentially ratchet up tensions and create a dangerous situation where we don't want to walk into another world war as we did in 1914, because, China is a nuclear armed superpower, as are we. So I think we need to pursue a more nuanced policy where, we deter and contain China, but don't risk a rush to war either.
Yeah, they deserve respect, and they deserve, a thoughtful approach. And I think it'll pay off.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's turn to one more area in the time we have, and that's the Middle East. And I'm particularly interested in your thoughts on the recent, Iran has been a bad actor in the region for a long time, but through proxies. And their proxies are taking a pounding. Hamas barely exists anymore. But Hezbollah, I thought, would be stronger than it's appearing to be. Since Israel has been unable to articulate an end game, either south or north in their fights, what is an end game to this adventure in Lebanon?
Well, that's what I'm wondering about as well, and that's what I just wrote about, in fact, in the Washington Post. And there's no question that Israel has made tremendous military advances against both Hamas and Hezbollah, but I'm still not sure what their exit strategy is or what their end game is. In the case of Gaza, somebody's got to rule Gaza in the future. Otherwise, Hamas will just, rise again from the rubble. But Israel has not come up with any plan for post-war governance. The only really realistic alternative is to have the Palestinian Authority involved, but Netanyahu doesn't want anything to do with the PA. He refuses to sketch out a path to Palestinian statehood, and that means that friendly Arab states are unlikely to get involved. So who's going to rule Gaza? Big question mark. And in the case of Lebanon, it's very easy for Israeli troops to go into Lebanon, but very hard for them to get out. I remember how Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982 and wound up staying there until 2000. I don't think they want another 18-year commitment, but what is the alternative? Because, as soon as Israel pulls back, Hezbollah will reestablish itself on the Israeli-Lebanese border for all the harm, for all the damage that Hezbollah has suffered. It still remains very much a fighting organization. So at the end of the day, I think there is not a military solution to Israel's security woes, or not a purely military solution. There has to be some kind of political settlement, but I don't see any initiative or any desire for that settlement from the Netanyahu government. So I'm very concerned about where this is going.
Let me pursue that concern for 1 second. Trapped in that same box you just described, I end up thinking that they have a military solution in mind, and their military solution is to get the United States to go to war with Iran.
Yeah,
So
that could be it, but that's a very dangerous game to play.
very dangerous for us too.
Yeah, I also wonder if part of Netanyahu's thinking isn't to exacerbate the crisis right now in the hope of wounding Biden and Harris and helping Trump, who's been more friendly to Netanyahu, helping Trump to get elected. That could also be part of his strategy. But either way, it's a very dangerous game to play, because if this conflict with Iran escalates, the result could be Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz. It could be Iranian attacks on Saudi or Emirati oil facilities. It could be a massive spike in oil prices, an economic downturn in the West. So there's a lot riding on the line here, not only for Israel, but for the U.S. and the entire world.
Yeah. And as you say, well, to bring us back to our current events, it brings us back to the choice Americans face in this election between, I just don't know what. I mean, you look at the characters around the world who seem to be advocating not forget Americans, the characters in the rest of the world who are advocating for one side or the other in American win could not be more different. The folks, who are the folks who want Trump to win, and who are the folks in the rest of the world who want Harris to win?
Well, it's pretty clear that most of our allies want Harris to win. The partial exceptions might be Bibi Netanyahu in Israel, maybe Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, because both of those guys, MBS and Netanyahu, think they can manipulate Trump much more easily than they could manipulate Harris.
They're right.
But, I'm sure they're right. I mean, Trump's biggest well-wisher in the world is probably Putin, because they've established such a cozy relationship. And Putin has been, targeting U.S. politics to help Trump and the Republicans. So that's something that should be very worrisome to us. Whereas by contrast, pretty much all of our allies are terrified by the prospect of a Trump presidency and hope that Harris prevails.
Max, we are out of time. It went by very fast. Look, I want everybody to read Max Boot's book, follow him on the Washington Post. As you've just heard, very thoughtful, clear historian, scholar of armed conflict, and a terrific writer. Max, I really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you for those kind words. Really appreciate the chance to talk with you.
I hope we do it again.
Thank you.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Marj Halperin knows more about radio than I ever will. She spent, years at Chicago's legendary WXRT. Then she became the deputy press secretary to Mayor Richard M. Daley. And I don't know, because I think it was the campaign. So maybe, I'm guessing March 1989. She led the League of Chicago Theaters, and since I raised an actor, this is near and dear to me. She steps in to host this show when I'm not here, for which I am truly grateful. But what's really important right now, well, there's a lot that's important, but she's leading Indivisible Chicago and organizing folks to win in November. Marj, thanks for spending the time with me today.
Well, I'm blushing by that intro. Thank you so much. I want to only say that I'm not leading Indivisible Chicago, but happy to be a member of the group and a former board member, and one who helps organize the campaigns, both in Michigan and Wisconsin, on the ground in order to get Harris and Walz over the finish line.
Well, those are important states.
They're pretty important states, and our whole premise of our campaign for Indivisible Chicago is that we sit in this unique place. So wherever you live in the Chicago area, you're about an hour and a half from one of those two key battlegrounds, and we are coordinating with the Democrats in both states and canvassing every weekend, phone banking every day, text banking. And we also offer training for people who are nervous about canvassing. I lead that with my colleague Mike Lenahan. We're doing them on Zoom for out-of-towners who are coming from all over the country to Wisconsin. And we do them in person. We're going Monday the 14th to Ann Sadler on Belmont. And Thursday the 17th will be at the Hideout. So folks who want to get a little more comfortable with canvassing knowing you got to do more than you're doing now if we're going to win, come on over. That's
yeah, I mean, Marge, I voted already. I think millions of people have already voted, but I don't want anybody to think that there isn't more to do. And so let's use our time together to make sure we've identified every way people can still help.
Yeah, we are organized, as I said, in both Michigan and Wisconsin. There's also, I want to mention Rust Belt Rising, which is a terrific organization that is currently doing phone banking into swing states across the country, but also, interestingly, into Ohio, where Sherrod Brown is in a crazy tight race against a MAGA Republican, and we don't want to lose that Senate seat. So what they're doing is they're calling to re-register voters who have let their registration lapse. They've got a complex algorithm where they can compare past voter rolls to current addresses, and people who moved, they're capturing them and calling them and saying you should renew your registration. So that's a great way to get involved also. But more than anything, we need people on the ground knocking on doors.
Wait, hang on. Let's stick with that one for 1 second,
Oh,
Marge,
all right.
Because for those of you who are listening, this is really timely because the registration deadlines are coming up. And in fact, they're already closed in a couple of states. So this is today's fire because we only have a few days for people to actually register to vote. Or re-register, or even challenge their being put on a provisional, sort of the state telling them that they can't vote, which is happening in a bunch of states. So this has to happen now. This isn't next week's job because next week or in 2 weeks for sure, it'll be closed everywhere and you can't register a new voter in a lot of states. And there are some states you can register up to election day, but in a lot of states they just close early. And so
strangely, Wisconsin is one of those with day of registration, which surprises me because of all the ways they limit your ability to vote. They have same day registration, but you're right. Many states do not, and we need them all.
Yep. Okay, so I didn't mean to interrupt, but I needed to raise the flag on that one.
Yeah, I'm glad you did. It's those phone banks are pretty easy too. People who are nervous about phone banking or knocking doors, but this is not a time to hesitate. I want to say. You just got to get out there and do the thing that will make a difference.
Marge, I love knocking on doors, and I like it when I do it by myself, which I haven't done in a while. But I really love it when a whole group of people decides they're going to canvass together out in a community. It's a joy. It's not a chore.
Yeah, I agree, and that's what we're doing. We're every Saturday in Wisconsin and every Sunday in Michigan. In Michigan, we're focusing on St. Joe, Benton Harbor area. And in Wisconsin, we've been in Racine and Kenosha. In the last weekend, we're going to focus on Milwaukee because that is the most critical place in that state to turn out the vote. But yeah, I want to say why I love it, and I'd like to hear what your feelings are too. On the one hand, going with the group is great. Come with us to Michigan this Sunday. We order pizza before everybody heads out, and it's a really fun time. But what I really love is when I'm at the doors talking to voters, because for all the research and reading and commentary that I do, it is so illuminating to have the direct conversation with voters. It's anecdotal. You can read the polls, although don't, because there's no benefit to that actually right now. But the actual conversation helps me understand the issues that I read about and see reflected in the polls. Last Sunday, I was in Michigan, and I talked to a truly undecided voter. From where we sit, we're like, come on, how can anyone be undecided? This is ridiculous. The choice couldn't be more clear, right? But I stood on this woman's doorstep, and she told me she was an independent and she votes for candidates on both sides, but hadn't made up her mind. So I give her my story, which is what we do at the doors, right? And for me, women's access to abortion is a key issue because I have granddaughters. They don't have the same rights that I had in all my adult life. And that's a concern. Then I see she's got some toys on the porch, and I say, maybe you have little ones too. She also has granddaughters, and she believes they have the right to choose. Well, then you should be voting for Harrison Walls. Yeah, but she's got some concerns about immigration, right? So she identifies herself unwittingly, probably as a Fox News listener, based on some of the things she has to say. But she listened. One of the things she said was about abortion. Well, it has to go to the states because we need a amendment to the national constitution. Well, no, you don't. You just need a majority in Congress to pass a national law, right? She's led to believe that it's in the Constitution that women don't have the right to abortion because of the way the Supreme Court issued their ruling. But a law, carefully worded, everyone thinks can restore the rights we had under Roe v. Wade. She didn't know that. She said she'd look it up. And I think she will. And a lot of the conversation points we had, she seemed very thoughtful. And I could almost see the cognitive dissonance between the facts I was giving her and what she hears on Fox News. No wonder she's undecided.
I love that story, Marge. I mean, the personal contact with voters is moving to me for many of those same reasons. It also is a reminder that, look, Americans aren't crazy, and we're not suicidal. We are under a cloud of misinformation, for sure, and some very powerful propaganda. But one thing that people everywhere appreciate is somebody taking the time to ask them for their vote, to actually show up and say, hey, this is important. And the personal testimony of someone coming to your door, look, it matters. I mean, if it didn't matter, the Jehovah's Witnesses would have given up the practice a long time ago.
I don't know how that's working for them, but they do it. You're right.
Yeah, I mean, it works. And I remember in my own life, people would hear things and they would go, Edwin's a crook or something. And then somebody would come to their door and go, I actually know him and he's not. And they would go, oh, okay.
Right. It's that personal contact.
Thing. Yeah.
It is amazing. And even if they don't agree, well, like that woman I left and said, I hope you will give this some thought and we'd like your vote. She said she would. It was a good conversation. Even though she said, oh my God, I have to vote for Harris. Well, I wish she'd said that, and she might come to that. I won't know. But those conversations are really meaningful. In our training, we say that when you make a connection, it can be really a touching experience. I had a woman on another trip to Michigan who, this was a neighborhood of very small homes across the street from the airport in Benton Harbor. These were people who were struggling, and Biden was still on the ticket. And when we were canvassing then, and she was sympathetic to what he was trying to do, but concerned about his age and all the other things. But this woman had just lost her job. She said, I have this month's rent, and I'm going to have to figure out next month. And I was extremely empathetic, talked to her about ways the federal government could help, but also local programs, because I was campaigning also for state candidates, as we do. The glass was broken out of her storm door. She reached her hands through the glass, and we clutched hands and finished the conversation that way. It was just an amazing experience. She said she was voting for Biden. I have no doubt she'll vote for Harris. Yeah. But are we, how do we help somebody who's truly struggling? It helps me understand while we blithely go with our talking points. There's a real world there, and if you don't walk door to door and talk to people, your time spent on Facebook doesn't turn a vote.
My experience going door to door is the most important thing is just go to door and listen, to hear people. Yeah. And people want to be heard. They want a campaign to hear them. They feel like American politics is distant and disconnected. And just listening turns out to be persuasive. Yeah,
it does. And, it's not a debate on the front porch of somebody's home. It's a conversation. And when you make that connection, it's really helpful both to the voter and to me as I seek to understand what's happening out there.
So there's that part of it that I find fabulous and moving and interesting and keeps me going. But then there's also a whole group of other people doing it, and it's a shared experience. I find it builds community. It actually, when people go get together and go talk to their neighbors, it builds a sense of cohesiveness. And that's true even if the neighbors are in a different state. It reminds us that we're the same country, and it reminds us to pay attention to things that you don't see in the news. It's sort of a reality affirming experience.
Yes. Right. That's right. And I, as I mentioned earlier, I'm doing training on Zoom once a week for the people who are coming from all over the country into Wisconsin. I mean, every training, we did one last night, there are people from both coasts. People are coming by the thousands because I have them in my sessions by the hundreds. So that will be an amazing community in Milwaukee that last weekend. I mean, some are coming now, but the last weekend is the focus in Milwaukee. And it brings to mind something people always ask, do I have to pretend I'm not from Chicago? Or is it okay that I go across to another state where I don't live? Well, for the most part, it doesn't even come up. Like when I first started traveling to canvas, I would park my car blocks away because I didn't want to see my license plate, But it doesn't matter. I mean, don't wear your White Sox hat in Milwaukee, But other than that, if people ask, and they just about never do, we have a great answer. It's because what happens in your community, in your state, impacts me and my community and the whole country. And I'm here because I believe so strongly in democratic values.
Yeah.
And if the person that I'm giving up my Sunday instead of being home with my family because it's that important, and people respect that, unless they oppose you, if they're MAGA, they aren't going to like it. You don't belong here, but that's okay because you're not going to win their vote. But the people who agree with us or are open to our ideas, well, thank you for coming.
Yeah, I mean, I don't ever see a time when you're dishonest with people.
No.
If they ask you where you're from, you tell them.
That's right. And there's a good reason why I'm here.
Absolutely. And I would add one other thing, Marge. It's not just that it affects me and my community, but there are really good people all around the country who do not deserve the MAGA rule they live under. I think about the people in Ohio. I think about the gerrymander that lasted forever in Wisconsin that's now finally broken. But I mean, you can go down to Florida and there are good people in that state who do not deserve the abhorrent government that they have, taking their books out of their schools. I mean, it's crazy what they're living.
Yeah, editing climate change out of dozens of state laws and school
books and then
has not actually helped them, has it?
No. And a 6-week abortion ban, please.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Women are dying. And I did have that conversation with someone who did not agree with us, who just said, well, they can get support from Planned Parenthood to travel. Well, you're not in an emergency. I mean, it comes across as heartless, but it's really just ignorant of people who don't understand the depth of the problem or how it impacts women. Yeah, I already said that's my main issue. There's plenty of others, You can make the case for democracy over fascism. There are many reasons, but supporting women.
Yeah, but none of them. Every time in our life, Marge, there have been elections, there are a lot of issues. And, you and I would like to think most of them cut the way of the Democrats and not the Republicans. But we've never been in an election where all of them cut that way until this one.
Yeah, right. Right. Or isn't it the way Liz Cheney put it? I'm going to butcher it. But basically, I think she's saying put the other ones aside right now. Because democracy, the others die if we don't have democracy. So whatever the other issues are you care about, protect our Constitution, our country first. And by Constitution, I don't mean the one that the Supreme Court is writing. I mean the original one.
Yeah, I mean,
they seem to have their own.
They have their own. They're politicians in robes.
Yeah, right.
All right, so Marge.
Yeah, go ahead.
You know the audience on this call, and we got a bunch who listen all over the country through the internet. What do they have to do today, tomorrow, and the next day?
Well, you can go to indivisiblechicago.com/calendar and see all the activities that we have. You can, if you're around the country, join phone banks. We do them every night to either Michigan or Wisconsin during the week. Michigan Mondays, Wisconsin Wednesdays, and now we've added additional ones through the week to both states. And we have text banks for those who like to do that, and you can reach literally hundreds of people at once. It's kind of an amazing, fun thing to do. But really, we need you to canvas. So there are swing states all over the country, by the way. We are focused on Michigan and Wisconsin because of where we live. But if you're in California, there's important work to do in Arizona and Nevada. If you're on the East Coast, head to Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is not as well organized as Wisconsin, certainly. I don't think anyone's as well organized as Wisconsin. They are awesome. Michigan,
they're awesome. I've been impressed with Michigan, too. I'm impressed.
Yeah. We have a few frustrations with the state party, but we are well organized on our trips, and they go very smoothly in Michigan. Those are critical states, and the polls still show 1 to 2 points in both those states. But Pennsylvania is a big place and has a lot of need. Public Action is a main organizer in Pennsylvania, and I would suggest working through them. They have a lot of smaller grassroots groups like ours on the ground throughout the state. But these are important, critical places to go. And of course, Georgia and North Carolina, even more, are Trump's must-win states. Pennsylvania is ours. Presuming, if I can, that we're going to take Wisconsin and Michigan, which we are hopeful about. But don't look at the polls. They're not going to move. They either are inaccurate, or to the extent that they're accurate, there's just not a lot of movement. It's a marginal election. Wisconsin, Hillary lost Wisconsin by something like 3 to 4 votes per ward, which is what they call their precincts. Biden won it by about the same margin.
Yeah, it's turnout. It's all work now.
That's right. We just have to turn our people out. You're not going to, don't wait to see Harris surge ahead. No one's surging here. But we will win if we turn out our vote, because we have more Democrats in these states if we can turn them out. And that's
and the other side, they're not doing the same kind of field work. Their turnout strategy is hate and fear. If we can just make people hate enough and be afraid enough, that'll motivate them to show up, and we don't have to go to their door. It is an ugly, divisive, dangerous tactic for our country, but that's what they're choosing.
It is, and more than that, with the Trump family controlling the National Republican Party, they don't have a lot of money. They're paying his legal bills and supporting him and his family's enterprises, as opposed to putting it into field. And I've seen stories that state parties, organizations are concerned that they don't have the support from national that they want. All the more reason for us to pour on steam. That's when you surge past if you're running a race.
Right. And we're past the time when it's helpful to talk about all of the horrible things about Donald Trump, grifter, criminal, rapist, fraud that he is, and plus terrible president. And it's just time to say to people, it's not up to him. It's not about him anymore. It's about you. Show up now. This is it.
Yeah, less than a month. It's just incredible how fast it's going. When we go to Michigan, Wisconsin, we'll knock a couple thousand doors on a trip. That really makes a difference. You have about a 20 to 25% response rate. So you leave a lot of literature. It's a lot of not home people, but that's a really good rate, 25% every time you go. Phone banks have about a 5%. So it's a pretty big difference when you're knocking on the doors and talking to people for all these reasons. And again, it's not a time to say, I'm uncomfortable going to people's houses. Well, we're going to be a lot more uncomfortable if we lose this race.
Yeah, and you know what? If you think you're going to be uncomfortable going to people's houses, go with others. These group outings are just fun. They're fun.
Yeah, they really are. And when you're knocking with a friend, you're on this side of the street, I'm on that side of the street.
Yep.
I just talked to somebody. It's really exciting when you have these conversations that you can share with each other. And we do it all on an app on your phone. It's quick and easy. No paper clipboards, all that stuff. We don't do that anymore. It's really easy and quick to record your data. And nothing more satisfying for me, and apparently for you too.
I love it. My son and I would go door to door together, and we would, of course, how many people did you talk to? How many people did I talk to? We had a little competition on a block. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, I was out with a group of 6 last Sunday, Three couples, friends who all piled in cars and came over, and they had a great time. And they had never canvassed. For a couple of phone bankers, I think, but none of them had ever canvassed before. And it was just a fun experience. So call your friends and bring them.
Marj, so this is the work we have to do for the next couple of weeks. How are you thinking about post-vote organizing? Because we know that in lieu of spending money getting out the vote, the Republicans have opted to spend money to contest votes. They've changed laws so that they don't have to certify votes. This thing they tried to do in Congress on January 6th, they're now just saying, that was stupid of us. That didn't work. Let's do it at the states before it even gets to Congress. And they've passed laws in states that will unfortunately allow them the chance to do that. How are we organizing for the fight after the vote?
Well, there are national organizations and coalitions, and Indivisible Chicago has representatives who are participating there. If we have to take to the streets, of course, we know how to do that. But there's also some concrete work that can be done. And I don't remember this from long ago elections, but in recent cycles, we have been doing a lot of ballot cure work. That is, with all of and probably I don't remember this because the states have made it more complicated. You know, in Wisconsin, you have to have a witness to your vote, sign the front envelope in a certain place. You have to date it. And I think maybe you date it in two places. I can't remember all the details now, but there are a lot of them. And if you don't follow to the letter what they tell you to do, you have a window in which you can cure the ballot. You can fix it. So when those ballots are put aside, we get those lists and we run phone banks and call people and tell them, here's what you need to do. You're getting your ballot back. You need to put the date on it. You need to get a witness, whatever the things are that we're missing that would disqualify you. And that happens immediately following Election Day. And that's important work so that when those challenges happen at the state, the more votes we have, the harder it is to reject them.
All right, this is a question that I hate asking, but are we prepared to challenge their votes with vigor?
Oh, I'm sure the party is, and the Harris-Walz campaign will do that. That's not something we are a part of, but at every state level, there are organizations, party organizations, and grassroots groups working on that. The Wisconsin Dems that we've already mentioned, very well organized, and all of these questions indicate what we know in the pit of our stomachs. This election will not be over November 5th. It probably will carry right through to January 6th again.
And we have work to do afterwards too.
That's right. But the more work we do now, in our fantasy, the landslide denounces him and it's impossible. I saw somebody, we're all clutching at straws. We want to be optimistic, and I am when I go to the doors. Reading the polls and stuff doesn't do me any good. But somebody shared with me an article, a column where the guy said, I don't know why we're sweating it. Every model I run shows Harris gets 270 electoral college votes and Trump 268. Like, wow, that is not comforting. I'm not sitting back resting on laurels with those. That headline does not work with the rest of the column.
Taking a cue back from Al Gore days, I have taken that word landslide and put it in a lockbox.
There you go. Yeah, it's going to
stay in the lockbox.
Yeah, it's just not happening. Don't look for that. We want a good, solid win. I'll be glad for that. But a landslide is not. The old Nixon-McGovern votes, no. That is not happening.
I'm worried about the Senate. So, and people should know if Harris is the president and the Republicans can control the Senate, look for them never to put a Supreme Court nomination up for a vote. Look for them to fight every cabinet nomination. This is what they do. So, we have a lot of work to do to be able to govern. Yeah.
Biden has accomplished an incrable amount with this recalcitrant Congress, and history will show that. Yeah. History will judge him ultimately, probably on whether or not Harris prevails, right? Did he wait too long, or was his timing just right? We'll find out. But what he's accomplished governing is extraordinary, considering the Congress you just described.
Yep. All right, Marge, we have almost no time, and I just, I don't actually on my show talk to people from Chicago very often. So I want to just take a second about our city. It related to the presidential race because, Trump looks at Chicago and says, as he says about every city that has a large black population, it's a word I can't use on the radio. It's a terrible place.
He just told the Detroit Economic Club that if you elect Harris, the whole country looks like Detroit,
I know,
which is making an amazing rebound, by the way. But our big city.
And right now our city's getting some headlines. Our city government is getting terrible headlines because of school board crises, because of all kinds of things. But the city itself is bigger than our government. I mean, you and I both served in city government, and we've also not been in city government. The city is bigger. Just tell people that Chicago's not a terrible place.
Chicago is a beautiful place. We were all outside watching the Northern Lights last night. Yeah. I live downtown. I walk the streets and the lakefront easily in daytime, nighttime, and soak up the beauty. Chicago. We have my husband is a volunteer tour guide for the Tourism Bureau here, and people come from all over the country, and they're all over the world, I meant to say. They're astounded by how beautiful our city is and how clean and safe. They come a little worried sometimes because they hear these stories, and then when they come, they're just laughing at what their friends back home might have been concerned about. Now, if I had more than a second, I'd say a little more about our current governance. But our mayor has great ideas and very poor communication would be the bottom line there.
Yeah, I wish from a communications expert.
I wish he would sell these progressive ideas a little more strongly. And if I could say one thing to our Chicago listeners, we do have our first ever school board elections, and in case you're not following the news, there's a choice between candidates funded by the teachers union, candidates funded by the public school, by the private school voucher lobby, and charter schools. There, just like nationally, there couldn't be a more stark difference. You want to invest in public schools and provide equal education and quality education in all neighborhoods, or do you want to have a voucher program, which research shows benefits people who are already in private schools? And to the extent that they attract people to private schools, they decimate the public schools. There might be third-party candidates. It just mirrors the presidential race. There are additional candidates who are not getting money from either, but you're wasting your vote if you don't pick a side. I stand with the union, even though I don't love how clumsy they've been with City Hall and their influence on the mayor. But I trust teachers more than I trust the out-of-town billionaires who are funding this charter school network PAC that is pouring money into our local races. So that's my speech about school board elections, which you have people all over the country who have lived with elected school boards in big cities, and maybe that's a conversation that some of your callers will join because they've been mixed results with elected school boards.
Yeah. We've talked about vouchers around the country and that movement and how dangerous it is. Marge, I've loved talking to you, and you and I will talk again soon.
Great. Thanks for having me, Edwin.
You bet. Thank you.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
The Philadelphia Inquirer's national columnist Will Bunch is back. Will and I have been talking, 3 years maybe, and on this show, and he's always just fabulous. He's a superb columnist, a writer of books that we need to read. But books aside, during this election season, Will has just been, just spot on, and a voice that, frankly, isn't heard enough. Will, I want to start, though, with something that's just enormously important, and that's baseball. I'm a Cubs fan, and you're a Phillies guy.
You're picking you're picking a very painful subject today, but that's okay. I'm willing to go there. So
yeah, I just want to hear. Misery, I guess, loves company, and again, I'm a Cubs fan. So just like, what happened to the Phillies?
I don't know. It seems like, I think. I mean, there are definitely some problems with the way their lineup is constructed. I mean, they just need some more young, flashing hitters. Maybe not to get too ethnic about it, but maybe do some more recruiting in Central and South America and the Caribbean, because they don't have as many young studs from those parts of the world as other teams do, like the Mets who just beat them. And so I think they need to do that. I think they were also hurt by the fact that they had a pretty easy run in the National League East, and they clinched early, and then they had that 1 week bye. And I think the inaction, I think they weren't ready to hop back in against the Mets, who were just on a total hot streak. So it was kind of the worst of all worlds, really.
They had a great record all year. They had a great team. I just thought I'd see them in the world. Frankly, I thought I'd see them, really competitive against the Dodgers and maybe even nudge them out. Now it looks like San Diego is going to nudge out the Dodgers anyway. I mean, it's a weird year.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, the only team. We'll see how Cleveland does tomorrow, but it seems like the only team that had a good seed in the playoff and is going anywhere is the Yankees, which has happened before, but which is the last team I wanted to see succeed. So, I mean, it's been a great year for watching baseball. It hasn't been my favorite outcomes, though. I'll put it that way.
I just want to also tell you that although I'm a Cubs fan, I do live in Chicago, and the Chicago White Sox record this year was one for the record books. The worst team in history.
Yeah, when I was in Chicago for the convention, and it was fantastic meeting you and Jennifer, by the way. But when I was there, I was actually able to take in a Cubs game, which was they actually had a afternoon game the afternoon before Kamala Harris's acceptance speech, so it worked out perfectly. But I was debating whether I should. The White Sox were coming back that weekend, and I was debating whether I should. I've never been to whatever they call that ballpark these days. I can never keep up, but I've never been there, and it would have been cool to see such a historically bad team. My weird history is that I switched allegiances midway through life. I grew up a big Mets fan, and so to beat that record of the 1962 Mets is pretty. I mean, that was before my time. I was only 3, but still to beat. I mean, that record always loomed over the franchise when I was rooting for them back in the 20th century. So that was quite an achievement by the White Sox in a way. It was very historic.
Very historic. All right. Well, let's now transition from historic baseball to something a little more timely. All eyes in the entire country are on your state. If Kamala wins Pennsylvania, she wins. There's not a path, I think, for Trump if Kamala wins Pennsylvania. So, I mean, I
sort of agree with that. I mean, you're right. She's got to win Pennsylvania. I think she's also got to win the other upper Midwestern states.
She does, but I think she will. The one that worries me is Pennsylvania.
I agree. And it's fascinating. I mean, I wrote my last column, and I saw it's the lead story in the day's New York Times about this thing with Elon Musk. Elon Musk agrees with you and me, Ed, when he thinks that Pennsylvania is the most important state, and he is moved here, basically. He set up a war room in Pittsburgh, and he's planning to travel on the states. He might apparently he's going to knock on doors, so I might answer the doorbell one of these days, and it could be Elon Musk and his entourage is going to be there for reasons that would take up the whole show, so I won't get into it, but I'm registered as an independent, so they'll probably try and woo me to vote for Trump. So it's crazy, but it does show how important Pennsylvania is. And it's interesting how the state is just divided down the middle. I mean, we have a large the rural vote is a huge percentage of the vote here in Pennsylvania, and they've gone gaga over Trump, and he's really boosted voter turnout in these rural areas. So when people wonder, how Trump can be doing so well in a state that has these, cosmopolitan metro areas like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, which has become much more cosmopolitan than people can imagine. It's changed a lot in recent years, but that's how it's his ability to, he's not. Trump is not popular in the suburbs. I mean, I live in the suburbs right outside of Philadelphia, and I've lived here since the 90s, and I've seen it happen firsthand, this area going from a slightly Republican area to like a strong Democratic area over the years, and they push people away, but it's balanced out by that rural vote.
Well, I guess, but Elon Musk doesn't feel to me like there's any overlap between him and his values and his life in rural America. He may backfire, don't you think?
I mean, he's got this thing where he's offering voters $47 to get. I mean, the gimmick is that you're getting somebody else to sign this pro-gun, pro-free speech. Not that Elon really believes in free speech, but this petition. But it's really to convince people to vote for Trump. It's as close to barely legal bribery as you can get. And he's claiming he loves Pennsylvania. And the funny thing, and people here in Pennsylvania just think this is hysterical, is his aide said, well, Elon is both an Eagles fan and a Steelers fan, which is like,
that's impossible.
It's like what we were just talking about. It would be like if one of your neighbors in Chicago said he was a Cubs fan and a White Sox fan. I mean,
I would say
probably.
Yeah, I mean, you can't be that and be from here. It's like it's just like disqualifying.
Yeah, so I think it is disqualifying, and I think most people here see him as a total phony. But he's a rich fan. He's a rich phony. There's a lot of people who there's a lot of people who worship rich people. It's like, oh, when I wrote my column about him this week, I had a couple of commenters on Twitter were like, oh, you're just jealous of his success, and that sort of thing. And so that element's out there. I mean, certainly, if you're like me and you still waste way too much time on X Twitter, he's got his legion of fans, just as he's got his legion of detractors. But anyway, I think the point about Musk is he is right in that this is really going to be a make or break state in the election.
I seem to have some alarm going off. Give me one moment to tell it to shut up. Okay.
Okay.
That's weird how that happens. Wow.
All right. Sounds like you got it.
I got it. All right. So, just talk me through some of the dynamics. Wasn't Barack there this week?
Yes. Well, it's interesting. I mean, certainly we're getting a lot of attention here in Philadelphia, but Pittsburgh in particular has been a huge focus, it seems like, of the campaigns. It's like both campaigns are really spending a lot of time in Western Pennsylvania because I think the divisions of Pennsylvania are really on display there. I mean, you've got Pittsburgh, which is no longer this old dying steel town and is now is very young and rejuvenated by a lot of like tech businesses and whatnot that have located there. And as a result, it's very heavily Democratic. So you've got that, but you've also, you've got, it's not as extensive as Philadelphia, but you've got a pretty healthy ring of suburbs around Pittsburgh, and they've grown more Democratic as well. But then you go not too far out of Pittsburgh, and you're in rural Western Pennsylvania. Some of the regions that James Carville famously compared to Alabama, in a very conservative mentality, like Butler, Pennsylvania, where Trump has had the two rallies, the one where he was shot at, and then the one that he had with Elon Musk the other day. The campaigns are really waging war there. Harris would seem to have a big edge in terms of she's opened much more, many more field offices across Pennsylvania, and she seems to have just a much more sophisticated get out the vote operation than Trump has. And in fact, reading the New York Times piece this morning on Elon Musk, apparently there's some thought that Musk's outfit that is setting up camp here is going to make up for that for Trump, which doesn't seem like a good idea, but that's what they're trying. But to live here and to try and watch, getting back to the theme of the day, baseball. I mean, to try and watch a Phillies game late summer and into October was to be just bombarded with political ads because, not only do we have the fight for the 19 electoral votes here, but on top of that, we also have one of the premier U.S. Senate races, and Bob Casey versus Dave McCormick, who, a hedge fund multimillionaire he's spending a fortune on this race. So basically, we don't get we don't get soap ads anymore. It's just like political ad after political ad after political ad.
I'll tell you my sympathy for that. I mean, here in Illinois, we don't have any, so you my deep sympathies. But let me talk about that Senate race for a second. I don't understand what's wrong with your state that Republicans really don't like it, in the sense that you got to go out of state to get a Republican Senate candidate now twice in a row.
Yeah, I'm here, and I don't quite fully understand it either. I mean, they just, they like having these wealthy candidates like McCormick or Dr. Oz who can self-fund their campaigns. And
didn't Oz live in New Jersey? And doesn't McCormick live in
McCormick
Connecticut?
Is from Connecticut. Yes, exactly. But it really just shows. The Republican Party is just really a bunch of lightweights, they have a lot of power in Harrisburg in the state legislature. They still control one of the two houses of the Senate. And, they're the kind of people, they're people who take lots of money from oil and gas companies and they're not, Diane, they're not personalities like, love them or hate them, John Fetterman. I mean, that's a personality that the Republicans here don't think to have people. And honestly, McCormick Oz was a personality, I guess, but McCormick doesn't have as much personality, but he has money. So, there's a vacuum here in the state Republicans that they've taken advantage of. And it's good. It's good for the Democrats because, Pennsylvania is a very parochial state. So the argument that you're not from here, I think that's going to work. Anyone sure would work in Illinois too, but it's really a powerful argument here, because we have a lower rate of people moving away. We have a lot of native-born people here who live in Pennsylvania their entire lives, so they're even less likely to trust somebody who gets branded as a carpetbagger. Bob Casey's from a famous political family. His dad was the governor, he's popular. I wouldn't call him a beloved figure necessarily, but he's been popular, and he's shown an ability to win here again and again, not always in the best circumstances. So, I think it looks good for Casey, but it's just such a volatile year that nothing's really a slam dunk, So,
well, let's go back to Elon Musk for a second. So, I was interested when you said he's trying to make up for the deficit in get out the vote operation on the Republican side. This is sort of a theme of conversations I'm having all day. The Republicans they really screwed up their get out the vote operation this time. And I think there's a natural cap on the number of Trump voters. He can't convince anybody to be on his side, and he's not even trying. He has his base, and he needs every single one of them to turn out to have a chance. But he's not going to convince anyone.
Which really relies heavily on a get out the vote operation. Right. He needs to be in these counties like Butler County, these rural counties where he's very popular. He should be going to every farmhouse and every whatever and making sure that everybody gets out the vote in these places. And I don't think they've been doing that.
They defunded that operation when his daughter-in-law took over the RNC. They put their money instead into election litigation to try and cheat. Yeah, but so instead, so Donald Trump's counting on his own personality and fear to drive people to the polls. And so, I listened to a chunk of his rallies in Pennsylvania. First off, he's a madman, completely insane. And then second, nothing is true. Nothing is true, Will. his promises are lies, and his observations are, I mean, I'm not even talking about Hannibal Lecter. Like, no, we don't control the weather.
Right. Or I mean, this kind of started spiraling out of control with the whole Springfield, Ohio thing and the Haitian migrants, and it just segued right into these crazy, it's like not only the migrants eating your pets, but now they're stealing your hurricane relief money as well. It's just snowballed from one thing or another. And I'm glad you brought this up, because this is actually what I'm going to be writing about my next column that I guess will come out on Sunday online. Well, specifically, and I mean, it's the number one issue that's been on my mind anyway. And then actually, last night, in the Atlantic, Charlie Warzel, who's an excellent writer and was with the New York Times for a while. I guess now he's writing for the Atlantic. Did a great piece that basically said, I think the headline was something like, "We've never seen anything like this before." But and it's basically that all the talk about disinformation in the campaign, that's like too mild a word. That we basically have set up this war between half the country, which still is, kind of clinging to the quaint idea that like facts or reality matters, and the other half of the country that is just willing to create a bubble of like unreality around their entire lives and around their entire information ecosystem. And that's what we're seeing with this hurricane thing. And the thing is, I think these worlds are so incomprehensible to each other, have gotten so alienated from each other that I think people in the so-called elite world, I mean, look at again, Jennifer and some other media critics have done such a great job focusing on this. But I mean, the media's inability to understand this race and the stakes, I think a lot of it is just I don't think it's anything venal to a degree. I think a lot of it's just a failure of imagination. Like, they can't wrap their arms around how half the country is already off the deep end, and it's going to be very difficult to reel back into the reality-based world,
that's really important. But I want to first, you should read Dana Milbank's recent piece. He went to one of these rallies, and he's doing the same kind of thing. It's a terrifying and good piece. But on the media generally, I think we've been through this before. We were through it, in the lead up to the Civil War, when all of the normal media was in the tank for the rich owners of slaves. And then we had a whole bunch of startups that weren't traditional media, and the Atlantic was one of them, that came up at that time to say, what, the country's missing a story. And I just think while the traditional media has failed in so many ways, this is why Kamala's campaigning on, call her daddy. There's a different media that's growing up that's actually telling Americans this story. And I find that fascinating.
Yeah, I agree with you, Edwin. And I think what's happened here is interesting is in their own different ways. I think both the Trump campaign and the Harris campaign, they both acknowledge kind of the death of traditional media, but they have different ways of handling it, right? Trump is trying to tap into this network of unreality, which has found a home on Elon Musk's X. It has a willing TV ally in Fox News, or if that's not far out enough for you, there's Newsmax or the other ones. And so he's able to run this totally bat guano crazy campaign by living in that media. And what Harris has also found out is that that the traditional media, especially like say the New York Times, for example, really has nothing to offer her. That they can't help it. They can only create more headaches for her. So she's identified the media that young people who are still in the reality-based world, who are frustrated at the state of the country, but have turned to other sources of information. She's decided to focus on those, and going on the like everybody else. I'm going to get the name wrong. Call me daddy. Call your daddy.
Call her daddy. Yeah.
Somebody daddy. Call her daddy. Yeah. Call her daddy. Yeah. going on that, and everything from The View to going on Howard Stern. I mean, these are all
ways to get to people.
I mean, they're not considered, quote, the mainstream media, unquote, but yet they have large audiences. And frankly, given the state of the mainstream media nowadays, they have larger audiences in many cases. So, I mean, as somebody who works in, what I like to think is still one of the better arms, but it is still nonetheless an arm of the traditional media. Yep. I think when we look back on the 2024 election, I think we're all going to agree that the traditional media, the mainstream media, has been just one of the biggest losers of this election. They've lost so much. They've lost so much status and so much prestige and so much influence, I guess, most importantly. And yet they, it's something they can't really accept or acknowledge,
Yeah, I want to be the first to say there's great reporting going on around the country still. Really great reporting. Yeah. And the New York Times does great reporting, but there's something broken in their political coverage. And I don't know.
And when people say that, Kamala Harris hasn't done any tough interviews or tough questions, first of all, I think just doing 60 Minutes when Trump chickened out, and I think that kind of puts that whole argument to rest. But also, and it was a shame because I think for some reason not as many people saw or listened or pay attention to this as they should have. But I listened to her interview that she did about a month ago with the NABJ, the National Association of Black Journalists, which happened right here in Philadelphia, and they asked, I think, a lot of the good, tough questions that she should be asked. Because I do think I want to see her. I tried floating this on Twitter, and I guess to no avail. I guess because we're too traditional media. But with all the focus on Pennsylvania, I would love for Kamala Harris to come into the Philadelphia Inquirer office and let us do an interview. And if we did, I would ask her tough questions. I would ask her about fracking and climate change, but from a progressive perspective and not from the conservative perspective, which is how she's always asked about it. And I would press her. I think I would press her on the Middle East in a way that she hasn't really been pressed on. I think there's still avenues for tough questions that she ought to be answering that haven't been asked. Because I'm not, I'm very focused on the stakes of this race, and I have no doubt that a Donald Trump victory would be an incredible disaster for this country, and I think I write accordingly. But at the end of the day, I'm still a journalist, and I'm not a partisan. And I don't think the fact that Donald Trump is such a threat to democracy means that the Democrats should get a free pass. That they should try and do more to explain themselves than what they're going to do. I know most people seem to think one or the other, but I kind of think both. I think you can oppose Trump, but you can still ask more from the Democrats.
And let me put both in a political perspective. No single party rule gets anything right. They always get it wrong. The Democrats need a healthy right of center political party in America to help us get it right. You can't, if you're a monopoly, whether that's in capitalism or in politics, you end up abusing the system. And I think about, the Democrats in Chicago for years. A monopoly doesn't succeed properly. And we need today there is no Republican Party that is a right of center party. It doesn't exist. Yeah. It's a cult. Hey, you brought up a substantive issue. Let me just spend 1 second on an actual substantive question, which is, did Donald Trump really say he wants to reopen the dirtiest coal plant in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, in fact, I'm probably going to try and write something about that next week also, because that's just is mind-boggling. And it's the same old. It's kind of very similar to what he did in 2016 when he was campaigning in coal country, right? And he told the coal miners he was going to bring their jobs back. And for some voters, that's a very visceral appeal, people, this situation in Western Pennsylvania with this coal plant. Apparently, it was a big mess. I mean, the coal plant was bought by a venture capital fund, and or some kind of hedge fund owners, and like most hedge fund owners, they were jerks. They closed the plant without any warning. They didn't. They screwed over the workers. Yeah. But that doesn't change. That doesn't change the fact that the plant was a dinosaur. And we need actual leadership on these problems. We need people to come into these places and say, look, we know this was a source of jobs, but these jobs just aren't viable anymore. But here's our plan for, transitioning you guys into the things we do need with clean energy and related products. And that's hard work. And like Donald Trump does not do hard work. He just will go into a place and say, I'm going to get your old jobs back without any consideration of, he doesn't believe in climate change, obviously, or anything else, or even capitalism, because capitalism basically just even agreed that these jobs were no longer worth it. But, that's what he does. He sells people nostalgia, and you can have your old way of life back, basically. Yeah.
Well, Will, the whole country is going to watch Pennsylvania, intensely for the next few weeks, and I know we have an edge in early voting, which is interesting already. But we'll see what happens in farm country, I guess, whether all of them want to show up for this madness, absolute madness.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Trump is gambling that doubling down on xenophobia and that sort of stuff is going to get people worked out and bring it. That's Trump's get out the vote operation. It's not. It's not people knocking on your doors. It's him. No. It's him sending out this message of hate and getting people whipped up. Yeah.
That's
so
not
we'll
us.
see how it plays out.
Yeah, there's an appeal to better angels to be had.
Yeah, and certainly that appeal worked in 2020, and it's worked arguably in the last couple of midterms, pretty much. Yeah. And so we'll see what happens in 2024.
Yeah, and all those farmers, they all have daughters, and this abortion question is not going away. So we'll see.
Yeah. That's right. Well, maybe the farmers' daughters will decide the presidential election. That would be. All
right. Well. Thank you for your time today. You're going to win the award, I think, in the whole show for creative use of bat guano in an interview.
working for a newspaper and not being allowed to use some of the words that every other media is using now.
Hey, it's radio. Can't use them here either.
Forces you to be more creative. So. Yeah.
All right. Well, take care, Will. Enjoy the weekend, and we'll talk soon.
All right, Edwin. Great. It was great talking to you again. Thanks so much for having me back. I appreciate it.
You bet. All right, everybody. That was the Philadelphia Inquirer's Will Bunch, terrific columnist. Read his stuff. We'll be back.
You're looking at the big picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Bill Scher is back. He is, of course, the politics editor of the Washington Monthly. And as you guys know, you need to be reading the Washington Monthly. Bill, I have so many things I want to talk to you about, but you just dropped a piece, and I have been reading it and haven't quite gotten to the end because it just dropped, on the differing media strategies deployed by Trump and Harris. Talk about that.
Well, we're seeing Harris go on a big media blitz this week. She's done The View. She's done 60 Minutes. She's done Howard Stern. She did Stephen Colbert. She did the Call Her Daddy podcast. And alongside that, Tim Walz did Jimmy Kimmel and Fox News Sunday. So that's a pretty diverse mix of media outlets and shows. A lot that's non-political, mostly friendly interviewers, but not completely. 60 Minutes is, you might not realize this, but the most watched news show still, even though it's not as big as it used to be, but it's bigger than any cable TV news show. What has Donald Trump done media-wise the past few days? You might not be as aware of it because it's all conservative media. It's Fox News' Laura Ingraham. It's Hugh Hewitt's radio show. Ben Shapiro's podcast. There's this right-leaning comedy podcast called Flagrant that you might not be aware of. That's what he's been doing. And in fact, he's not done the last 24 media appearances he's done have all been conservative media. He's staying in this cocoon. And Harris has been criticized for not doing enough interviews. But I think you see from this strategy, when she does them, she's trying to touch a lot of different demographics. These shows, some have older audiences, some younger audiences, some women, some more male, some focused on African-American audiences. Like, actually, I should mention All the Smoke. That was a podcast she did last week, hosted by two former NBA players who are both African-American. So she's trying to speak broadly to the country, give a message of national unity, trying to diffuse polarization. Donald Trump is trying to maximize polarization, trying to maintain this us versus them framework, that there are these evil people out to get you, and we have to stand and fight to vanquish them. It's just two clearly different strategic philosophies how to win, but I also think how to govern, how they would function as president. Trump is trying to maintain an divisive attitude towards governing, that it's about giving power to your side and screwing over the other. And Harris is trying to say she's trying to be a president for everybody.
Just so we're clear, when Harris is speaking to these different and diverse audiences and doing outreach like to Republicans, is she tailoring her message to each crowd? Is she saying what each one wants to hear? Or is she being pretty consistent about who she is and what she wants to do?
There's some, overall, it's consistency, but there are wrinkles. I think she's been very consistent when talking about her main economic plank. She almost always gets to, I love small business. I want a bigger credit to new business startups. It's $50,000, not $5,000. That she wants to have a bigger child tax credit, that she wants to give first-time home buyers money to help with their initial purchase. That stuff is pretty consistent across platform. Now, she did go on The View, which is a show with an older, more female audience, and rolled out a new policy, which is expanding Medicare to cover home health care services. And that's not just a message for people on Medicare, but for Gen Xers, who she refers to as the sandwich generation, people who are taking care of both their kids and their parents. So that was a little more tailored, not that she would have mentioned other places, but she chose that show to push that policy, and I think for a reason.
I mean, because I listened to Donald Trump say, you have to listen to like 3 hours of gibberish to hear one sentence that makes sense. But in that gibberish, he'll say something to every room he's in that he's going to give him he's going to cut a tax or a regulation. He's in Nevada with all those tipped workers so they don't get taxes. He's in a room with oil execs, so we're going back to drill, baby, drill. It doesn't. Anyway, that's just my take.
No, but where Trump goes pragmatic and where he, triples down on insanity is sort of a hard thing to get your head around, because there are these flashes of pragmatism, but there's so many other cases where he's doing the exact opposite of what any pragmatic political consultant would recommend. So it's hard to find the through line, the universal theory of the case for him.
Yeah. So we're voting now. I mean, we're in it. And, this piece, the way you talk about it, sort of let me say this better. When Donald Trump was first elected and he beat Hillary, I was horrified, but I'm like, okay, the man's got elected president. He got elected president legitimately. Let's see if he will reach out to the country that didn't vote for him. And then he gave his inauguration speech, which basically said, you guys who didn't vote for me, you're a terrible country, and I'm not going to help you one bit. There's carnage on the streets, right? And then for 4 years, he didn't reach out to anyone not in his base. He just focused on them, and that's what he's doing again. So here we are. We have one candidate out talking to the whole country and one candidate out talking to a base. And I don't understand why there's an election, why it's close.
Well, to schools of thought on that. So one is that even though Trump has never really recalibrated or tried to expand his base in a more traditional way, he does seem to have made some inroads, particularly with younger Black and Latino men, and maybe in the case of Latinos, maybe older. And that may be that the things that that are his trademark, is kind of anti-establishment, anti-expert, trafficking in the way he talks very pointedly and abrasively, that potentially sort of transcends anything he has said that has a more racist tinge, at least to certain pockets of these communities. And therefore, even though Harris may be doing better with whites, particularly college-educated whites, that's being offset by these inroads that he's making in these other communities without doing a real wholesale transformation. Now, there's another school of thought. Sorry.
Go ahead.
This has been articulated by Nate Cohn at the New York Times, that a lot of pollsters have been using past vote recall as a data point to use when they weigh their data. So when every pollster does a poll, they don't just take whoever responds, they adjust the data to try to match what they believe the demographics of the electorate would be. So you know that electorates are usually about 53-47 female male. If you get a sample that's more heavily male, you gotta tweak that. You're gonna tweak for race, you're gonna tweak for age, you're gonna tweak for college diploma. Certain things we have a pretty good beat on. It hasn't always been the case that they've tweaked on past vote recall. Who did you vote for in 2020? Should that be a data point that would ensure you don't miss Trump voters, for example? There's an argument that there's non-response bias, that maybe not that Trump people are afraid to talk to you, they just don't pick up the phone or participate in an online survey. And so if you miss them, you got to do something to make sure they get in the mix. Well, if I ask you, did you vote for Trump? Well, then I know how many Trumpers I have here and I can adjust my data accordingly. Should they do that? Or is that going to artificially constrain and make static your sample, and you're going to miss if there's actually a shift in sentiment late in this race? So Nate Cohn was making the argument that the New York Times polling is not going to do that, is not going to use past vote recall. And their most recent national poll had Harris up by 4, and which is similar to what Biden's margin was against Trump. It was 4.5. And that might suggest it's going to translate into an electoral college majority, even if it's a narrow one. So we don't really know what's the right answer here, and we're all flying a little blind.
You talked about college-educated folks making part of the Harris coalition. You guys published a piece by your publisher, by Paul Glastris, that I loved. Talk a little bit
Politico
about...
published this piece.
Politico published the piece.
Yes, so Paul had a article for Politico. We gave some excerpts on the Washington Monthly site, but he wrote it for Politico.
You know what? I hate to say this to a guy who actually works for a publication. Sometimes I don't remember which publication I read something for. I apologize for that. Anyway, would you talk a little bit about this notion that state college grads might be the deciders?
Yeah, Paul had a really smart insight that, we talk about college educated versus non-college educated, and that's been a huge divergence in the Trump era of American politics, where Democrats have done much better with college educated and Trump much better with non-college educated. And if I can go to a little bit of a digression here, this is very pronounced with white women college grads. There's always been this notion that sort of white women abandoned Hillary, and that's not really true, because she improved considerably with white college-educated women, but that was offset with a loss in non-college white women. And Biden did even better with white college-educated women in 2020 than Hillary did. So that trend line seems to keep going. What Paul has identified is you have to remember that most people who have college diplomas are not Ivy Leaguers. That's a very tiny percentage of your college grads. The plurality of them are state college voters, and that's not even flagship state universities like University of Michigan. This is your Michigan State, your NC State, your Northern Arizona University, and there's one guy on the ticket who has that credential, and that's Tim Walz, who's from like Caldron State University. I think it's a regional Nebraska college. Vance went to Ohio State for undergrad. I'm not sure if that would qualify here, or is that considered a flagship? So forgive me.
It's a flagship.
But he went to Yale Law after that.
Yeah.
Tim Walz is sort of purely a state college grad. And so, but Paul Glassertz argues that, perhaps the party should be thinking about how do we tailor policies to this critical swing voter, because they're probably not as democratic as your Ivy League college-educated voter. That might be more so than a non-college, but there's probably more ground for Democrats to gain there. And if they really spoke to them directly and had aid packages that really were tailored to that voter, perhaps they could make even more inroads there.
Yeah, and it's a large number of people, unlike the Ivy League crowd.
Right.
Yeah. Here we are, as I say, the election started, and I look at, as much as I can stomach it, what's going on, and I see the Republicans doing what they do best, lying, terrifying people, and bending the rules to give them unfair and maybe illegal advantages. Are Democrats running scared enough to turn out en masse? And will the outreach to Republicans, drive down some of the GOP numbers? Well, I think Republicans are now terrified and they want to show up.
You're talking about my favorite subject of this election, which is the ground game.
Yep.
And I'm not always obsessed with the ground game because research shows that it doesn't move the needle very much, a point at best, arguably less in a presidential race where you have a lot of attention and people will show up to vote without the help, whereas in a down ballot race they might need more hand-holding. And usually both campaigns have a similar quality of ground game, which makes it kind of a wash.
Yeah, not this time.
Not this time. And I've been writing about this since June. You're seeing more and more mainstream reporters catch up to it, although often not fully collecting all the dots here. So forgive me if I talk for a long time on the subject.
No, I'm an ex-Chicago alderman. I love ground game.
So you probably know that, when you knock on doors, you tend to go to densely populated areas so you can get a lot of doors efficiently. A lot of people don't answer the door, but you leave lit. It's not an efficient process even at best, but you try to do it as efficiently as you can. And if you're going to win a race by 10 points, it's not going to matter. But if it's down to a few hundred votes, maybe it does matter. And we're in a race now. If you take the polls at face value, this is all margin of error, nail biter races in every single swing state that remains, and that's about 7 swing states. So if that's the case, then that ground game could very well make the difference. What does Trump do here? So there's a guy named Charlie Kirk. Are you familiar with him?
Yeah, I love this story because I think what you're going to tell me is that Trump got hoodwinked by a scoundrel who's just like he is.
It seems very plausible to me. Charlie Kirk is a young right-wing activist. He started this group called Turning Point when he was literally under 20 years old. It started as a college-based group. They'd have chapters on college campuses, and they would essentially troll professors and try to dig up dirt and make professors look bad, say they're too radical, and just try to stir up a lot of controversy. And he got a lot of money from wealthy right-wing donors who thought this was fun. And Charlie Kirk has made a lot of money doing this, and he's tried to expand the Turning Point empire into a get-out-the-vote operation. He started this in 2022, mainly in Arizona, where he's based. and every race that he participated in, he lost. So it's not like he's figured out how to do get out the vote operations, although he did give it a try. Yet he's undaunted. And last year, he started saying publicly, Turning Point has a $108 million game plan to turn out the vote for Trump in Arizona and Georgia and Wisconsin. And we have a philosophy here that we're not going to focus on your usual swing voters. We're going to focus on low propensity voters, people who don't vote regularly or maybe not even registered. Who we think are MAGA in their hearts. They're hard right people. We just got to make sure they get them to vote this time. And we're going to focus on being ballot chasers, chasing those people.
Yeah, vote hard. The stuff they don't like.
Yeah. The RNC chair at the time, Ronna McDaniel, apparently is talking to Trump, and I'm not quoting her here, but effectively saying, look, this strategy that Charlie Kirk is putting out is kind of nuts. You know, we at the RNC, we've done ground game before. We know how to do it. Plus, Charlie Kirk is on his podcast. He's saying a lot of racist things. I know you're trying to make inroads with the black community here. He's saying that like he's afraid to go on an airplane if there's a black pilot. You really don't want to be around this guy. Charlie Kirk then goes on his podcast and says that Ronna McDaniel should be fired and replaced with Lara Trump because they don't know what they're doing. The midterms were their fault. They don't know how to get the vote out, and he could do it better. Guess what happens? Donald Trump shivs Ronna McDaniel, puts his daughter-in-law in as co-chair of the RNC, and outsources most of the GOTV work to Turning Point and to other outside organizations. And they're allowed to do that now because of a change in the Federal Election Commission rules that allow for more coordination with super PACs. But that's only advantageous if you have super PACs that know what they're doing and have any experience in turning out the vote. And we've now, so I wrote about this in June before this really got up and running. But there were Republicans at the time mostly anonymously saying to other reporters, I wasn't doing shoe letter reporting here, I'm just reading other reports. I'm just trying to connect dots, saying this looks like a grift. They want to steer money. Turning Point wants people to spend money on their GOTV app. We don't know if this app even works well. We think Trump's getting played here. But he does it, and I think in part because Kirk is telling him, hey, you don't got to worry about tweaking your message to swing voters. Just do what you do best, and we'll go find the voters that connect with you. Now, we have seen many reports in recent weeks from Republican Party officials in swing states saying, I don't know about this strategy. I'm used to seeing a lot of door knocking and canvassing around here, and I'm not seeing anything. The Democrats have really, but they've been ramping up all year. This strategy, it doesn't seem to be, playing out. And the Charlie Kirks, and now Elon Musk has got into this. He started his own PAC, and he's now working with Charlie Kirk. They're saying, they just don't understand. They want us to do it the old-fashioned way, going into the suburbs to knock doors where it's more densely populated. We're finding these people in the rural areas. Well, if you're trying to do GOTV in rural areas, these people live 20 minutes apart sometimes. Like, you just can't get to a lot of people easily. And, again, a lot of times you knock on a door, nobody shows up, and you're just dropping a pamphlet. So if you're trying to find a irregular voter and convince them, you really got to show up this time. Like, putting a little door hanger on the knob is not going to cut it. You got to make a relationship with these people. And, they have the reporters have gone to Turning Point training saying you should essentially stalk these people, try to mesh yourselves in their lives and become their friends, and then convince them to do it. Like, hey, if you can do it on a mass scale, good luck to you. But that's something that's a lot easier to do on paper than it is to execute in reality. And a lot of tried and true Republican officials are openly fretting that this is going to be a giant bust. And so if this is a game of inches, I don't think the Republicans have built the machine that's designed to win a game of inches.
Yeah, Charlie Kirk is a huckster and a fraud, and it couldn't make me happier that Donald Trump, a huckster and a fraud, has been taken by a younger version of himself.
And that's what's so weird to me about this, because Trump may be a grifter, but he doesn't want to be grifted. He wants to be the grifter. So he wouldn't readily want to throw a lot of money away on something that's going to make him lose. But I think he was sold on a plan that that did not challenge him to do things differently. He sold a bill of goods that was comfortable for him to accept.
Yeah. Now, but they are doing a different strategy to turn out vote. They're terrifying people, absolutely terrifying people with their ads and their campaign.
I don't know if that's all that new.
It's what they do best. Yeah.
They play the fear card a lot. They may be even more unhinged about it, more unrestrained. To literally just say within hours of a hurricane landing that the federal government has abandoned you and are steering money to migrants and not giving it to you, that is of a different order, I think, than what Trump has done in the past. And you are seeing mainstream media outlets call him on it. And this is sort of a test of how strong are the guardrails of the fourth estate. Can they get good information to people when so much effort is being put into spitting out bad information? And there's some good Republicans out there in North Carolina saying, hey, the response has actually been fine. Don't they can't control the weather. Don't listen to this nonsense. But this is kind of a stress test for the media here.
Yeah, I'm not holding my breath for the media. We can have that conversation after this cycle when we look back on the absolutely horrid job they've done. Talk to me a little bit about what it means that Trump isn't participating in transition planning. I assume that means that he doesn't want anybody to know who his donors are, and that he that the Heritage Foundation really did do his transition work for him, in Project 2025.
Oh, I'm not aware that he's abandoned transition completely. We had an article at the Monthly saying that we just sort of recommend that there should be good transition planning, even if the Biden White House doesn't want Trump to win. I'm not aware of the Trump people refusing to participate.
Yeah, they have. They have said they're not. There's a process, but we'll go on to something else.
Oh, well, if that is the case, that's just scary if he does win, because you need to have a good transition to have a smooth transfer of power. But that's going to be a problem for Trump more than it is for the Democrats. Of course, if Democrats lose, that's a problem in and of itself. But
I think it's a problem for everybody, because the vetting of people is what takes a lot of the time in transition, and that, of course, is what Project 2025 has been doing for a couple of years.
That's what Project 2025 was designed, so Trump would have a playbook to run with on day one, and not just the policy proposals, but the vetting of people.
Yeah.
That's part of the game. And everything we've seen from the Trump campaign is if you thought things were okay last time because there were people around him that could at least check his worst impulses, this time around, you will see none of that. Everything is about trying to bow to his id. And if he's not going to cooperate in transition plan, that does add to that concern.
Speaking of his worst impulses, so he's on the phone with Vladimir Putin, but we know probably 7 times at least, but they're secret calls, so we may not know all of them. I don't understand how the United States government does not know whether a former president's talking with Vladimir Putin, but that maybe they do. But he's talking with Vladimir Putin, and I am just imagining he's like calling him, and he's in his bathroom in Mar-a-Lago, and there are all these boxes with classified U.S. documents there. I haven't seen the stories that put together his theft of our national secrets and his conversations with Vladimir Putin.
We have evidence, from when he was president that he was pretty loose with secure information with Russian officials. So it would not be shocking that he was loose with them, out of office, because it's all speculation. We don't know exactly what has transpired.
Well, out of office is a crime.
Right.
Yeah.
We do know that, and hasn't. I don't think it's been. I think it was confirmed by Putin himself that he got these COVID tests while Trump was president, when Americans were struggling to find tests themselves, and Putin instructed him not to tell anybody, to keep it on the down low because it would make him look bad. It just shows how chummy that relationship is, it's hard to believe there are undecided voters left, although there are. But this is one of the things where it's really not a question of there being a confusing choice to make. There's not a lot of overlap between the two candidates. One sees Putin as a malevolent force to be checked, and one sees him as a friend to be flattered to and to cultivate. I don't know how more stark to put it.
Yeah, right. And the whole boundaries of Europe can change because of it. Really frightening. So all right, let's put on your crystal ball hat just a minute and give me your take on Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia.
I mean, they're all tight. Harris doing a bit better, in the Rust Belt, and a little worse in the Sun Belt. But Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, plus Nebraska 2, which seems pretty safe. Yeah. That's 270. Nevada is probably a little bit better for Democrats than the other three, than Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina. So if you give Nevada to Kamala, that's 276. That's a little bit of insurance, but Nevada wouldn't offset a loss, and it would offset Nebraska too, but it wouldn't offset Michigan, Pennsylvania, or Wisconsin. Yeah. And now, if she managed to pull off North Carolina, which seems to be surprisingly one of the better Sun Belt states for her, even though that's the one of those states that Biden lost in 2020. Mm-hmm. If she did happen to pick off North Carolina, then she could withstand a loss in I think Michigan or Wisconsin, if I remember correctly, might not necessarily Pennsylvania. Yep. So she has paths. She has multiple paths. Whereas for Biden, it was looking like maybe like the one path to 270, and that was it. But again, a lot of this comes down to how accurate are these polls? Is it as tight as they say, or are they projecting a different electorate than what will be the case? And how good is that ground game? How good is that ground game advantage? How good is the money advantage? Harris has a better money advantage. Does it translate into extra votes?
Yeah, you got to use it well.
But my attitude is that if it is going to be a close race, I am going to lean towards the campaign that has more money, better ground, making fewer mistakes. And I do hear people, the panic with Kamala is rising. Why aren't the numbers moving? Well, they seem to be kind of fading a bit relative to where she was peaking. Even if all that is true, I don't think you can ascribe it to a mistake that she made. I mean, she is playing pretty error-free ball. There's no day of clinging to guns and religion. There's no day of basket of deplorables. There's no day of you ain't black. She hasn't said anything that has caused major controversy. Well, Trump causes major controversy as a matter of course. Yeah. So I'd rather see a candidate, sticking to her message with those fundamental advantages and with the economic fundamentals in her favor. The GDP is up, unemployment's down, wages being inflation. Incumbent parties tend to win on those circumstances. So that even though the polls are very tight, all those things lead me to say I think she still has the edge. I
do too. The Senate's tougher. It was always going to be tough. But again, this is a ground game Senate race, I think. All of these.
Well, the Senate might be worse than that. The Senate is not as tight as White House. Tester is considerably behind in poll after poll. Ohio might be a ground game situation, although Scher has a slight lead there. But the other states, Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin's gone a little tighter as of late, but I would still give Tammy Baldwin the edge there. I think same with Michigan's got a little bit tighter as of late, but Slotkin still has the edge. So you assume, and Pennsylvania, I think Casey's been pretty not massively ahead, but decently ahead. So give Democrats all of those. Give them Ohio just for sake of argument. That's not enough if Tester loses in Montana, and that can't be offset with a long shot race and a long shot Democratic win in Texas or Florida. And no polling shows them to be close, but almost no poll shows any one of them ahead. And you got this one weird wild card race in Nebraska where the incumbent Republican Deb Fischer is running against the independent Dan Osborne. The Democrats can't give Osborne money because Osborne has disavowed the Democrats and saying, I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a stocking horse. I'm not even necessarily going to caucus with the Democrats. And to me, that makes the race less important, because if he means that, if Democrats lose Montana, Texas, Florida, but win the others, and let's say Osborne actually wins somehow, and even that I'm pretty.
If he doesn't caucus with him, it doesn't help.
Then you have a 50 Republican, 49 Dem, one non-caucusing independent.
The most powerful man in America.
Well, yeah, but if he sticks to it, saying I'm just going to be an independent caucus, well, then Republicans control the Senate. Republicans control the floor. Republicans can defeat cannot put judges on the floor to be confirmed. So I don't even know if having Osborne do well is. I mean, all that matters here as far as the Senate is, assuming Harris wins, can she confirm judges? Can she confirm cabinet appointments? If a Republican majority leader doesn't put those nominations on the floor, Osborne's presence doesn't mean much.
Yeah, really frightening. All right, well, that is going to be our last word because we're out of time. Bill, it's always great to talk to you. It's always great to catch up. And wow, what an amazing couple of weeks we're about to have.
Agreed.
All right. Take care.
You too. Take care. Bye-bye.
Matter.
Well, maybe let me compare philanthropy to government.
Sure.
Right? In philanthropy, you can't possibly affect millions, maybe tens of millions of people in a positive way by one person going in and doing something in the philanthropic world. Now, in philanthropy, what you can do is create models. Models of what works, right? In government, you can take the models that work and make sure everybody has access to them, and especially people who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford them.
Edwin Eisendrath is taking your calls now at 773-763-9278. The Big Picture is on now. WCPT 820.
Well, it's actually Paul Shivari taking your calls. Maybe we can get the two in these last few minutes of the show here. I want to thank Edwin for entrusting the show to me to kind of cap things off. That was Governor J.B. Pritzker that you heard before the rejoin there. He was on Hassan Minhaj's podcast this week. Really interesting podcast. If we had more time, I'd play a few more bites for you, but did a fun thing at the end where he played good billionaire, bad billionaire, where the host showed him different billionaires and he got to judge them. But there was more to it than that. He kind of talked about being a wealthy politician, kind of why he had to rely on the money to help him win in 2018, but he wants to even the playing field. But that's neither here nor there. We're going to try and get to your calls right now. Let's talk to Eduardo. Eduardo is, for as far as I know, down in Tampa. Eduardo, how are you doing? How are you holding up?
I did well. No property damage, no flooding, just lost internet for a couple of days. But there were some areas that were flooded and power lines were down. And there's businesses that are closed, partly because they don't have power. But slowly we're getting back. All in all, we weren't majorly impacted like Siesta Key down in Sarasota. Okay. The further south you go, they were more impacted. Yeah. I wanted to bring up the IV, I think it was from Baxter. I think there was a plant in North Carolina, and I just heard one today in Daytona Beach. So hopefully the media and some, I guess, people in Washington will shed light on that as to bringing that back online, because it's definitely a health issue. That's something that's needed with some people.
No, say that again. What is this exactly that?
The Baxter plant, yeah, they were affected in, I believe it was North Carolina, and I heard this morning also in Daytona Beach or something like that in Florida.
Oh, so, just in terms of some of the
they were impacted by the hurricanes Helene and Milton.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and hopefully that's something that can be brought back online. Hopefully the politicians in Washington and Congress will, shed some light on it and maybe even
get together
funding for that.
Maybe fund a bill to kind of help with the relief effort. I mean, that's just crazy. The two hurricanes in a row, especially of that magnitude, and Asheville, North Carolina, not even being a spot that's used to dealing with hurricanes, and just the devastation and the game of politics that's being played in the weeks leading up to the election. And I think I saw Speaker Mike Johnson said that the Congress won't convene just to do a disaster relief bill as part of their budget right now. And then we know that there's been FEMA, extension on spending bills that have kind of died in committee and didn't get passed. So, yeah, I'd like to see something get passed as well. And thanks for your call. And thank goodness that you're okay, Eduardo. Thanks for checking in with us today. All right, let's see if we can get to Jim right now. Jim from Chicago, always joining us. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Paul. Mary Shelley would be busting her buttons with pride over this media creation that the GOP has running for president. If he isn't a modern-day Frankenstein with Halloween approaching, I can't imagine a person who embodies the Frankenstein monster. He's got everybody terrified. He's got the media terrified. He's got everybody terrified, which is amazing. A nut from New York with an insane show, reality show that was all baloney, is terrifying the nation. He's terrifying the nation. And it's
down the stretch, it just seems like he's not even saying anything that sounds remotely just coherent.
Well,
it's just fear-mongering and making up lies down the stretch.
Yeah, well, but he never did. He never did. He never had complete control of his faculties. He's been just a media creation. That's all. He knows that. He knows what the cameras and the lights are, and his whole life he sought publicity. I mean, that was his life. His life was seeking publicity. It wasn't trying to do good for anybody. He was just seeking publicity for his own account. But to be deathly afraid of this guy is just absolutely ridiculous, in my opinion, because I think he's going to get murdered in this election. But I don't want to jinx it, but I can't look at it for 4 years. I can't look at that outfit for 4 years. The blue serge coat and the red tie. I can't take another day of that. Anyway, Paul, thanks a million, buddy. You take care.
Thank you, Jim. And I agreed. 4 more years of Donald Trump, aside from kind of the obvious how disastrous that would be and what we've already encountered in the first Donald Trump administration, he'd be 78 to 82 years old in that time frame, and is just down the stretch. It just seems like just shooting from the hip with just these made up monstrous claims that it just doesn't seem like he's attacking policy and talking about pushing agendas, or at least, what you've heard from politicians in the past where they're trying to push their personal policies and agendas. It just, we all know what he's all about, and he's trying to distance himself from Project 2025, but we all know that he's the perfect figurehead to push that type of agenda. So it's just the people underneath him. To go back to Jim's point, I always thought that not so much a Frankenstein, because, this creation of different types of parts, and I'm sure you could kind of break down to the different parts of Donald Trump that make him, whether he's an effective or not effective politician, but I think he's more of a Dracula, like a blood-sucking, money-sucking Dracula vampire of sorts. So that's, in terms of the Halloween and the joking. But we got time for one more call. Let's give it to Steve from the Gold Coast. Steve wanted to talk about the election. What's on your mind, Steve?
Yes, and Edwin was talking about this in terms of alternative media, non-traditional media, this sort of thing. I mean, this is what Donald Trump has built his entire campaign upon. The whole notion of, okay, you don't trust the experts, don't trust anybody who has some semblance of experience or credibility, educational background. You can't trust the experts. Remember what J.D. Vance expounded in the debate. So, this is the theme that they rely upon, because therefore you can't have a discussion with them, because they argue that anything that rational people will say to them is just some sort of concoction of the liberal elites. And, you can't trust the researchers. You can't trust the scholars. You can't trust journalists. You can't trust anybody. Just trust us. And therein lies the problem. These people are in an echo chamber. You can't get to them. And so when Donald Trump says, hey, they're stealing your relief money, that FEMA money is going to illegal immigrants as opposed to helping people in Florida, or that there's, that the Democratic Party has the capacity to direct weather and hurricanes towards certain regions of the country. Some people believe this. People are going to walk into that voting booth in November predicated on this kind of nonsense. And I mean that's a scary thing.
Yeah, and it's almost like a single serving type of talking points that are leading up to this election. Because you can talk about the long term stuff where the Democrats have been talking about climate change and talk about these hurricanes happening this week. Whether you want to make the argument that climate change is the reason why they were as intense or as frequent or as devastating as whatever they were, but they're being politicized by the right in terms of the how and when to react to it right now. And there's been an attempt at the long run for being prepared for these sorts of things, to try and prevent these sorts of things, to try and steer the course of human existence that we can not have as intense weather, just kind of that we have to deal with. But Steve, thank you for the call. Want to thank everybody that was part of the show this week. Got the list in front of me here right now. The guests: Max Boot, Marj Halperin, Will Bunch, Bill Scher. Thank you to Edwin Eisendrath. He did host a show this week, even though he wasn't live with us, and thank you for letting me have the last few minutes. So long, everybody. This has been The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath. Paul Shivari signing off.